continue thinking about the four opponent powers, which actually, when we unpack them all, end up explaining the whole Dharma to us, all the Dharma to us, really, and all the components are there. So we're going to listen to these teachings so we can take the tools to use to develop our qualities, no matter how long it takes, to become a Buddha ourselves, which is our natural potential, so we can be a better sentient beings. And like the Bodhisattvas, we think, if I don't do it, who will? This attitude of responsibility. It's my job. Sangye chadam soke chognam la jancho balu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola benche sangye drupasho Sangye chadam soke chognam la jancho balu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola benche sangye drupasho Sangye chadam soke chognam la jancho balu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gipe sonam ki drola benche sangye drupasho. And we make an offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. Make a mandala offering, the offering of all the contents of the universe, basically. Saji Perki Jogshing Metog Chamri Rablingji Ni Degen Padi Sange Jing Dumik Te Urwagi Drokundam Dag Jing La Chapasho. Can you imagine the Buddha happily receiving your offering? Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niyatayami. So yesterday we introduced the idea of these four opponent powers, these four steps in the process of purifying negative karma. So we start with the one called regret. So we start to look at the meaning of regret. So regret is this attitude, first, two parts. First, I am sick of suffering. So in order to say we're sick of suffering, we need to know what suffering is. So we look at the Four Noble Truths, and Buddha tells us what suffering is, So the one we usually know of suffering is the first one. Suffering of suffering, when the bad things happen. And the bigger picture, as far as Buddha is concerned, that refers to the lower realms. In terms of this life, it refers to the bad things that happen. Think of it this way. So that we know we don't want. Maybe the lower realms were a bit abstract for us, we don't know about that, but certainly we know we don't like bad things happening. That we can say with certainty, I'm sick of that kind of suffering, which means people being mean to you. And bad things happening, losing things, getting sick, ugly places, relationships breaking up. All of this at the simplest level in this life is the stuff that we don't like. We know we're sick of this. So at least this much. So we can imagine thinking of being born in the lower realms, which is, again, like I said, unless we thought deeply about the Buddha's teachings, is a bit of an abstract idea to us. If we can get our head around that and look at the lives of animals, not to mention spirits and hell beings, which are very abstract for us, and think, I don't want to be born like that, then that's part of it too. I'm sick of suffering. That's the first step in wanting to regret. So like if you cough and wheeze every day, you could have to be sick of suffering first to want to do something about it. But the other part, what's crucial, isn't it? In order to determine what to do about it, you have to know what causes it. You have to know what causes it. Otherwise you can't get anywhere. Because once you've established, the cause of a problem, then the solution is implied right there. So clear, so clear. So this is why regret has the second part is crucial, which is now I know the causes of suffering. Now I finally know the causes of suffering. Until now, normally I'm suffering. We all know that. But guess who? What are the causes of? Well, it's you and Fred and cancer and the doctor and Marlboro. They're the cause of my suffering. No, Buddha says. They're catalysts for your suffering. The cause of your suffering is your past actions and karma, negativity, delusions, karma and delusions. The second noble truth. So getting our head around that Buddha's view about why I'm suffering. That's the basis of then wanting to do something about it. Until then it's just, confusion, misery, guilt, anger, hopelessness, useless. It's not enough to be sick of suffering. Everyone's sick of suffering. But until you locate accurately the causes of it, you can't take another step. And here, this is what regret is. This is really what renunciation is. And this is what you get from practicing, the first scopes of the practice. The first scopes in junior school and high school. Really the very first one here, actually. Understanding the causes of suffering. That's the first one. Karma, your past actions. And negative karma. So we went into great detail about exactly what that means. What is morality? What is a negative action? By definition, we talked about this, Buddha's view, as opposed to the Christian view. A negative action for Christians is doing what God said not to. A negative action for the Buddha, it's a natural law as far as he's concerned. He didn't make it up, he didn't create it, he just observed it. It's an action that harms another. So we looked at when we do actions that harm others, we can see those, killing, lying, stealing, bad-mouthing, it's pretty clear. But then we have to look at what causes me to put negative imprints in my mind when I do those actions. And we looked at the motivation. The wish to harm the mouse is why I create negative karma when I kill the mouse. And if you look at the world in general, the killing of other sentient beings is motivated by either attachment or anger, isn't it? So it's obvious that's what a negative action is, but we unpack it and we see what it is that's in that action when I do it that causes me to leave a negative seed. And that's the motivation. The intention, the motivation, all these things, we looked at it. So that's what a negative action is, and that's what I'm regretting. Okay, why am I regretting doing it? Because it'll leave negative imprints in my mind, and those negative imprints will cause me suffering in the future. And hey, I don't want suffering. That's the analysis of regret. So it's not guilt, which is the one we tend to have, the feeling of I'm bad, which is impotent and hopeless and makes us just more miserable. Not useless. Regret is a wholesome, intelligent attitude. But you have to unpack it like this to understand it, because it's not implied. We just say the word, I regret. You have to unpack it intelligently and see what it means. So we have to cultivate that view. Cultivate it by saying the words, I regret whatever killing, lying, stealing I've done. Why? Because I don't want future suffering. These two don't come together normally. We normally think the answer would be, oh, well, because others don't like it. That's compassion, but that's got to come later. That comes in the second step. We haven't even got into that yet. We're getting to that one now. This has to be this one first. We've got to hear it. Regret is an attitude of like compassion for yourself. And we skip over this one. We gloss over it. We don't think of it this way. We know when it comes to eating food and doing certain physical actions that certain things will cause me suffering. So then we don't want to do them for that reason. We've got that type of intelligence. We don't have that type of intelligence when it comes to what we call morality, because we assume morality is all about being a good girl because someone said, and you've got to be seen to be a good girl. And immorality is being a bad girl, and you hope that no one saw you and you get away with it, which all implies the view of punishment and reward, which implies a person up there running the show. All of that is implied in the way we think of morality now, like babies. Well, it's not like that for the Buddha. We have to know it intelligently by unpacking it and thinking about it. Then we really will grow up. In this first step, regret, it's like you're becoming your own best friend. You're becoming accountable. You are the boss. So once we understand the killing and lying and stealing, not to mention the internal things of anger and depression and jealousy, will cause suffering to me. Until we get this, nothing will change, and we'll just stay miserable. We've got to get this relationship, this connection between the actions and the words and the thoughts I have, and how every one of them necessarily produces my experiences. This is so remote for us. We all think it's out there somewhere. This is the consequence of grasping at the self as inherent. We just feel like this big lump of permanent me plonked on this earth by somebody else to whom good things and bad things happen. And it's nothing to do with me. Hey, I'm just this innocent victim. It's not like that. We're the production. We are the creators of ourselves. We are our own handiwork. We made ourselves, and every moment we make ourselves. Like every moment you put a seed in the ground, you know it will bring a fruit in the future. You know that. That's botany. Well, every time you say or do or think something, you know that you're leaving a seed in your mind which will produce experiences in the future like the thing you did. So you've got to know the character of a seed before you plant it, baby. You've got to know what fruit it will bring. Same here. And we're using Buddha's view here. We mightn't know it initially, so we learn what he says, and we take it on board. He's the one who's giving us the instructions, that we're agreeing to take on board. So he says negative actions will ripen as your suffering. So again, we unpack what a negative action is. One that harms another, but one that is motivated by delusion, which is what makes it harm me. Understanding this, the logic of this is the basis of wanting to, is the basis of this first step, which is the first step of practice, which is called renunciation. And it's for my sake. There's no discussion of others yet. We've got to get this deep inside us. We've got to have, in other words, the only time we're going to really think deeply about what will cause me suffering is it will generate some deep sense of responsibility, deep sense of accountability, a sense of respect for myself, not the beating up of myself, which guilt does. It's a very different attitude, and we have to cultivate it by changing our thoughts. It takes time. So we discussed this one yesterday. What a negative action is, one that harms another. What causes it to be negative is the motivation. We've looked at all this, and that means the delusion in the mind. I blow my nose, I'm sorry. So we didn't look too much at delusions yesterday, but let's just say that briefly here, and then we'll go on to the next step, which is refuge. The next step, which was a reliance, we began to talk about that yesterday, which has got two parts, refuge and compassion. But if a negative, so I'll go back to the first step again, regret. If a negative action is one that is, by definition, is one that harms another, but it's negative when I do it, by definition, because it's motivated by a delusion, as opposed to a virtue. So we have to know the difference. And this brings us to Buddhist psychology. We've talked often enough about this. Buddha says the mental consciousness, our mental consciousness, has got three categories of contents. Buddhist psychology is very simple. And it hasn't changed in 2,500 years. So it's either Buddhism's stubborn, and they don't change, or it works. You've got to work it out. If it works, why change it? So for the Buddha, we've got positive, negative, simply speaking, we've got states of mind that are called virtuous or positive. And we all know them: love, compassion, these ones. Kindness, generosity, forgiveness. We know these. Immediately we hear them, we know they're the nice ones. And then you've got the negative ones. And there's this hierarchy of them. It's very clear in Buddhist psychology. The root of them is called ignorance. Simple word ignorance. We've got a very specific meaning. Mat-ripa in Tibetan. Mat-ripa, ignorance. Unawareness. Mat-ripa, awareness. Ma, unawareness. Negation. It's very specific, and here specific ignorance is an ignorance in our mind that doesn't know how things exist. This is the root delusion. The root delusion, they call it. The mother of them all, the root delusion. And we'll discuss this. Then it gives rise to the main one, but effectively the cause of all our suffering in day-to-day life, like we talked yesterday, is attachment. Attachment. This simple, cute word, attachment, which is this, we come born with it from past practice of attachment, which is the energy of dissatisfaction. Why we're dissatisfied? Why there's this gaping hole of feeling there's never enough, I'm not enough, I don't have enough, I'm not good enough, and no matter what we do or have or get, it's never enough. This alone is the disease of from practiced attachment in the past. This we recognise hugely. So what, of course, that brings, if you're a bottomless pit of nothing, you stay overwhelmed by that dissatisfaction. You try to fill up the hole by getting cakes and men and girls and things and power and money and clothing, the gross obvious objects of attachment, the objects of the senses. Believing utterly when I get them I'll be happy, and then more subtly getting praise and love from others and this kind of thing, and people liking us and approving of us. This is the deepest attachment of all. This one is the hugest one. So constantly craving all of this. But because we have this disease of dissatisfaction, and because getting more cakes and more praise won't fill up the hole, this is the tragedy of attachment. What it actually does is increase attachment, increase the dissatisfaction. This is the tragedy. We know that. Look at a junkie. We know very well every time you get that fixed, what it mainly does is increase the craving. We know that. Well, that's the point Buddha's making about attachment. It's the mind of a junkie, basically, and it's just a question of degree. It's a way of saying we're all junkies. It's just a question of degree, and it's called attachment. Such a simple word. And then when it doesn't get what it wants, aversion arises. Aversion, anger, which internalized is called depression, guilt. Listen to guilt. I did this and I did that and I'm a bad person. Listen to anger. You did this and you did that and you're a bad person. They're exactly the same state of mind, called aversion, which is the mental state beneath what we call anger or what we call self-blame or guilt, which ends up being depression, internalized aversion. So ignorance, anger and attachment, anger, these are the three main delusions. Others are just like branches of those, you could say that. The root is ignorance, and then attachment is the main one from this. And then on the basis of attachment, not getting what it wants, aversion arises. Then all the other dramas. This is samsara. This is what being in samsara means for the Buddha, caught up in these delusions. These are the root cause of all suffering. We do negative actions on the basis of these. And the action we do that's negative is negative because it's based on these. And this process of karma and delusions, doing actions with our body and speech based upon the delusion, is the source of all suffering. And so then we reverse that, the same with the good things. Actions of body and speech based on virtue is what produces happiness. Actions based on delusion is what causes suffering. Not punishment, not reward, it's just a natural law, Buddha says. So we regret the actions we do, which harm others, because they harm me. This is our first step, and we have to get this one deep before we even begin to think about this. We have to see how we're sick of suffering before we can start to see others are suffering. This is just a necessary step. You cannot have compassion until we've got renunciation, which is this attitude that's expressed in regret. And I'll explain. It's logical. So again, renunciation or this regret, I'm just saying that, renunciation is the attitude that's expressed in regret. Regretting having done actions that harm others because it will harm me, based on understanding karma and delusions, is what renunciation is. It's got two parts. One, I'm sick of suffering, and two, now I finally know why I'm suffering. Because of my stupid actions based on my stupid delusions. That's what brings renunciation. Now you think, I'm sick of this entire thing, and because you now know what causes it, you can go to the next step to fix it. As long as I think you cause it, I'm stuck, because I haven't located precisely the correct cause of the problem. As long as you don't find the cause of the problem, you'll never find the solution, will you? It's very clear. So once I've got this down, I'm now ready to have compassion. Why? Because compassion has two parts, just like renunciation. One is you see the suffering of others and you go, oh my God, this is unbearable. Just like you're seeing for yourself. Oh my God, this is unbearable. I'm sick of it. But now you see it the same in others. But now you know why they're suffering as well. And this is the basis of genuine compassion. Because of their karma and their delusions. Not the view, oh, they're suffering because of that naughty person, which then immediately causes us to turn compassion into anger. We think that's what compassion is. We get angry with the person who did it. That's the default mode in this universe we live in. That's our default mode in our lives. Whether it's I'm suffering and you caused it, or whether she's suffering and he caused it, it's the same. This dualistic view of thinking the cause is out there somewhere. But once you got it down that you're suffering because of your karma and your delusions, now you have a basis for having genuine compassion for others. Oh my God, look at this. They're just the same as me. They are suffering and they are causing themselves suffering. Mm-hmm. They don't realize it. That's why you then have compassion for the torturers. You end up, when you've really got valid compassion, the bodhisattvas have more compassion for the perpetrators than the victims. That's not meant to sound horrible. Why? It's logical. The victim is just finishing their suffering. They created it from the past, they now just finished it by being harmed. That's over. But the perpetrator is just beginning their own suffering. I said yesterday, remember I mentioned yesterday my friend Andre in North Carolina, whose son was murdered, interviewed that day on the local television. How do you feel about the murder of your son? His suffering is only just beginning, he said. That's what compassion is. That's a tough one, because we're used to the blame mode. The more we have compassion for the innocent dog, the more we hate the person who harmed them. We think that's logic, not disastrous, because it's based upon the wrong. Buddha says it's based upon a misconception of what causes that suffering, because we assume the innocent victim. This is the view of samsara. So again, we have to unpack all this, but we can't have compassion, any kind of, even faulty compassion. Poor victim, until we've got renunciation. But the compassion we're talking here is based upon understanding karma, and you'll get that for yourself first. This then qualifies you to have valid compassion. So okay, the second step, I'm sick, I regret from the depths of my heart the killing, the lying, the stealing, the bad-mouthing, the depression, the anger, the craving, whatever it might be, the actions of my body, speech and mind. Because I don't want the suffering, I am sick of it. Now I will say, whom can I turn to? What can I do about it? Now we go to the second step. Reliance. And it's got two parts. The first part is refuge in the Buddha. Like I said, we turn to the doctor. The best analogy here for our relationship with the Buddha is the relationship of a doctor. Because that is the role, one of the roles the Buddha takes in our lives. If I'm a Catholic, it's not like that. I turn to God because He's my creator, and obviously this process here would demand that I beg God to forgive me. Of course, because He's my creator. But that's not the Buddha's view. Forgiveness is great. Buddha is a very nice person. He will happily forgive you. But that's for his sake, not yours. It won't help you one bit. It just makes ego feel better. And that's, no, okay, if there's a view of Christianity that's valid and perfect, correct, you need God's forgiveness, and He will always forgive you. That's perfect, but not the view here. We've got to get this clear too. So, who is the Buddha for us? Then he's a person who was like a regular guy, like, a regular person who from his own hard work removed all the garbage from his mind and became, quotes, a Buddha. So all of Buddha's teachings, or his methodology, is his stuff presented that he applied and used successfully, so he's putting it down and showing us the method. And that's up to us, of course, to follow those methods. He is not the boss, we are. So okay, why do we rely upon him? Well, why do you rely upon a doctor? Two things. You've got to know you're sick of suffering. Either the suffering you've got now, or you don't want future suffering. And you want medicine to either heal you now or give you antidotes, give you preventative, so you don't get future suffering. That's the main view here. That's the main view here. So you don't get the future suffering. This is still in relation to yourself. Even though it's the second step, it's the consequence of regret. Whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor? What can I do about this garbage suffering that I know I don't want in the future? So we turn to the Buddha. So the first thing has to be that we know we're suffering, which is the first step, and I know the causes. So now I want the Buddha to give me his methods. So I have to know I'm suffering. First one for refuge. The second one has to be, like I said yesterday, you've got to know he's a valid doctor. You don't go to see some doctor because he looks handsome, Of course, someone says you should go to a doctor. And very commonly we get into a spiritual path like that. Someone says it'll make you feel better, you feel more peaceful or something. It's a bit more than that. The proper relationship. You have to check up that the Buddha's a valid doctor. So that means the only way to do that is you have to read and think about it and study it, listen to it, go into it. So you get some confidence. You have to get some confidence that this is valid. You have to get confidence, not because everybody else agrees that he is. Like if you'd been in Germany in the 1930s and you got caught up in all the energy of all the Nazis, everybody in the world agreed that Hitler was good, so you'd feel very comfortable in thinking that Hitler was good because your next door neighbour said he was good. And because we're all craving to be approved of, that's good enough for our logic. But it's no logic. None at all. We're such junkies for other people to do what, to praise us. As long as we agree with someone else and we're feeling like we've made the right decision. There's no basis whatsoever. That's rubbish. Everyone says the Dalai Lama must be the Buddha. We go, oh, he must be the Buddha, you know, just because someone else says it's not me. And because he makes you feel good. It's another one too. Because he makes you feel good. He must be the Buddha. Well, Hitler made people feel good. Extremely good. You see those movies about him. I saw that amazing film about him. Remember that woman?
Brown?
No, German, in the 30s.
Yeah. It'll come.
Huh? Yeah, I know, that's right. Ravensfeld or Robert.
Triumph of the Will.
Yeah, that's right. That's
and the Eternal Jew.
That's exactly right. What's the name of the
It'll come to me.
The woman who made it. Very good. She was apparently quite radical, bringing in new techniques for documentary movies. She was very amazing. Evie Ravenstahl or something, that one.
Leni Riefenstahl.
That's the one, yeah. What's her name?
Leni Riefenstahl.
Riefenstahl, there we go. That's the one. So anyway, I remember watching that film. It was a very amazing film about all the Hitler business. And you just watch it, and it was really like this. Hitler was like a guru, you know. Everyone was completely devoted to Hitler. Completely mesmerized by Hitler. Totally in his thrall. Worshipped the ground he walked on. So because we're all junkies are feeling good, and because he made us feel good, the logic is he must be good. So it's the same when we go to the Dalai Lama's teachings. Don't think I'm being strange here. I like the Dalai Lama, okay? His Holiness the Dalai Lama, one of my gurus. But hear my point. He's very powerful. He's very charismatic. The millions of people adore him. Okay, millions don't. All the Chinese communists can't stand the sight of the man. So millions of people adore the Dalai Lama. That's not enough, you see, but we're such chickens when it comes, such babies when it comes to good feelings. We're junkies for good feelings, like we talked yesterday. A good feeling for us is the definition of happiness, and whatever cause it has to be good, therefore. If you feel good going fishing, fishing must be good. If you feel good raping somebody, raping must be good. If you feel good torturing, then torturing must be good. That's the logic. We all follow what attachment wants, desperately like junkies, you know, but it's not valid logic. So you go to His Holiness's teachings. Everywhere you go, he makes people cry, he moves people. I'm not being cynical here, I'm not saying you shouldn't feel good. What I'm saying is, usually that's enough for us to think a person must be valid. Well, if you go to Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings, they don't let him teach until 3 in the morning now because he had a stroke. But before, if he just was running the show, he'd happily sit there until 6 in the morning. Well, excuse me, you don't feel good at all when that's happening. You feel really stressed and exhausted, and you think you're blaming him. You're thinking, how could he not realise we're all tired? How cruel Lama Zopa is, sitting up till 6 in the morning, looking all perky, continuing to do his teachings, you know. It's easy to think this, isn't it? So then that must follow, therefore, if I'm feeling bad, Lama Zopa has to be bad. That's the logic we use in the world. This is how we are. This is samsara. That's what we mean. As long as the hubby makes me feel good, I love him. The second he doesn't, I don't love him. That's how we live. We base everything on how we feel. And our feelings are unpleasant. And therefore we're attached to pleasant feelings. Junkies for them. So we keep being attached to the thing that caused it. Naturally. And then as soon as we feel bad, that's called suffering. And then we have aversion for the thing that seems to cause it. This is what samsara is. And it's not a valid base for any decisions. It's quite tough. So, I'm using the extreme example here. You think Dalai Lama's a Buddha because he makes you feel good. He starts his teaching on time and he finishes on time. You know, you sit in a nice chair with a ticket. It's all very civilised. And after an hour and a half, you see your mind and begin to get bored, looking at your clock, waiting for the tea break, and then he stops, you know, you feel all happy. Lama Zopa, no. One time, apparently, in Taiwan, he went for 36 hours or something, you know. The Chinese are kind of enthusiastic, so they don't time. But can you imagine, we'd sue him for torture or something, you know, in the West. So all I'm getting at is, the basis we use for feeling good, the basis we use for thinking something is good if we feel good, not enough. So what I'm getting to down here is Buddha. It's not enough that you think he's a nice guy. It's not enough that, you know, that people say, oh, you can do it, you feel good, you meditate and you feel good, you know. I mean, all these things are superficial. You've got to look into his teachings. You've got to think about them. Take it on board as your hypothesis. Not because, and then, again, not just think because he must be nice because other people think he's nice. Yeah, Buddha's got a good reputation on earth. It's true. Like the Dalai Lama has, you know. So it's a bonus if you feel good with His Holiness, but that's not the only thing to know that he must be a valid person. You've got to have confidence in his teachings, you know. That's the point. Same with the Buddha. It's a bonus that you like Buddha. It makes it easier. But you have to like him for a valid reason, that his teachings are valid. And this is the one, we're not used to this. We even say, whom am I supposed to believe? Because we're so used to thinking of belief. It's very deep. I remember mentioned this last week, I think, one centre where they study a lot of philosophy, and there's this fellow who's been studying philosophy for years, Buddhist philosophy. And then all the different views, even in the Buddhist philosophy. And he said, who should I believe? There he is studying Buddhist philosophy, and he's asking who you should believe. We think like this. Belief has got nothing to do with it. It's got something to do with it, but it's based on certain steps, You are the one. And this is scary for us. Just to have to sit there and make our own decision and make a commitment to somebody based upon our own wisdom is a really tough one to do because we're too scared what other people think. So if we were living in Boston and let's say Tibetan Buddhism had a really bad name, 90% of us wouldn't be Buddhists. It's a simple fact because we're all craving other people's approval. So it is a bonus and it's helpful that the thing that we like. It's like if we were all Scientologists, it'd be quite hard to be a Scientologist, wouldn't it? Because so many people hate Scientology, Or if you were a Nazi, and people all hated Nazis, you'd be very brave to be a Nazi, and you could think like that. So it really is tricky one because we have this terrible attachment to approval of others. It's the deepest one inside us, the deepest one. So it's not enough just to say, oh yeah, Buddhism must be good. They talk about it, they read about all these nice Tibetans, blah, 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 Better than nothing. Because if they are onto a good thing, then aren't you fortunate that you like a thing that will lead you in the right direction? Very fortunate. But you've got to have some certainty. And that's what you get from listening to the teachings. Belief isn't enough. I always remember my mother, she was a very devoted Catholic. Well, for many years she stopped going to Mass like some people, but she went back again. And then later on in her life, after her 7 kids and her husband and all the dramas and the suffering of typical life, she kind of lost her faith, as they say. Lost her faith. That's the way they say, isn't it? Well, that means because, like most people, she didn't study the teachings in depth. When your faith has gone, what have you got left to stand on? Whereas I'd rather have a person who's got using more logic, who's got some logical basis in their own mind for why they're doing and thinking something, and maybe not so much holy feelings. Do you understand my point here? Mm-hmm. It's easier to have a holy feeling. Oh, well, if you meditate every day and you get really good feelings, then you'd love to meditate and you think you're being holy. You're not, you're just following attachment. So our feelings, until they're quite advanced, will be mostly attachment feelings. Not being rude here. So we can't just trust our feelings. Because when your feeling goes, you think, oh, well, okay, Buddhism is terrible, I'll throw it out now because I feel bad. This is why we're up and down like yo-yos, Got to have a logical basis for liking Buddha. Therefore, for taking refuge in the Buddha. So let's look in depth about this refuge business, what it means. I have to sniff and I'm so sorry. What can I do?
Blow my nose and sniff.
Okay. What's refuge? We talked about this last week, I'm sure. If you were there, some of you, but we'll go through it again briefly. Were any of you here not for the refuge teaching? Okay, fine. Okay, so refuge, what's it mean? It's a term they use in Buddhism, It's a term they use for when you become a Buddhist, quote unquote. So, okay, the idea of reliance here in this step is all we're talking about. The basis of it has to be 2 things. One is you have to know you want the medicine of that doctor, which means you know you're sick, so you want medicine to prevent you getting more sick because you don't want suffering. That's your fundamental reason for turning to the Buddha. Not because he's some nice guy, but because other people say he's good. You've got to have a sense, and the more you have a sense of your own suffering, which always sounds depressing to us, talk about suffering. But we can see this when it comes to our health. Some people have a lot of good health and can afford to smoke cigarettes and drink things, but it's later that you see the consequences coming. You see it coming in old age, isn't it? You get the cancer, I'm seeing now with my lungs, I'd smoke 80 cigarettes a day, on top of the marijuana. I didn't see consequences. Then I gave it up, didn't see consequences. But now when I do my prostrations, not so many, I can feel the wheezing, my lungs. And maybe that's, 50 years later, the consequences of my smoking. And as well as old age, these squeezy old lungs. So here's my point here. If you've got strong health, then you don't care about smoking and eating bad things, you know. But you know if you're careful, the consequence in the future. That's the analogy here for karma. So to feel all kind of, to really think about, even though you're not suffering. So okay, in our world, people are sitting in this room here, when we hear about the first level of suffering, even in ordinary terms of this world, forget about lower realms, we think, oh, I don't have that. We think of people who are on the street, the homeless, they're living in war zones, they're living among terrorists, poor, in prison. They're the ones who've got the first level of suffering, the gross suffering. That's what we think. So we think, oh no, I'm not suffering. But it's not until we get to the second noble truth, the suffering of change, which is all the suffering of these delusions. As Lama Zopa called it one time, the inner prison. He wrote to one of these prisoners who first wrote to him, who's living in his little cell 23 hours a day, you know, won't get out alive of these prisons, living in a nightmare, a few books, the inside of a pen, disgusting food with his orange jumpsuit, noise like you can't believe, like in a rock concert all day, he said. Can you imagine? That would be what we call suffering. And then Lama Zopa, when he wrote to him after he wrote to Rinpoche, said, your prison is nothing in comparison with the inner prison of ordinary people. And this is the one we don't know about until we start looking deep. The second kind of suffering. He said, the inner prison, the prison of attachment, the prison of jealousy, the prison of dissatisfaction, the prison of depression. That's the one we know about. When we start to look in our mind, it's shocking to see. You know, we've got a way to go to identify this one. A friend of mine went off to do a year's retreat in France. She was from New York. Said, Robina, I just began to see my mind. She had another year. I had to continue, Robina. I just began to see my mind. So way to go, okay? And this is seeing the subtle level of suffering. Not the subtlest yet. The suffering of the neuroses, the suffering of the delusions, the suffering of the fears and the dramas, the ordinary stuff that we would feel guilty to call suffering if we compared ourselves with homeless people. But it's a subtler level of suffering. And my friends in prison who have the gross one, they understand this. And this is the point here. They know they can't change the first one. They can't open the prison doors. They can change their minds. And they know it more than we do. But this is the main one, because this is the one. You either go crazy or you change your mind. And we have this sense that we're free to do whatever we like, but we never look at the mind. So until we start looking deeply into our own mind, we will never have this renunciation, we'll never have this regret, because we won't see our own suffering. We'll only know it's suffering when the hubby leaves me. I'll never think I'm suffering, I've got my hubby every day. We don't think we're suffering if we're healthy, but we only think that we're suffering when we get cancer. That's because we're not looked deep enough at the second kind of suffering, which is the suffering of the neuroses, the suffering of having attachment itself, having jealousy, depression, low self-esteem, dissatisfaction and fears and anxiety. Ordinary, but this goes to levels to which we can't even imagine. So we have to start going inside deep, and this is depressing for us. It can be, if we're not seeing it properly. So this is what gives us, this. The more we understand our suffering, naturally, the more we're going to turn to the Buddha. The more we will rely upon the Buddha and his methods. This is the point here, the first step in wanting to turn to the Buddha. You've got to know your suffering. And our trouble is we wait till we get the wake-up call, which is the gross suffering. We wait till the hubby leaves us. We wait till we lose the job. We wait till we get cancer. Then we go, oh my God, I'm suffering. Because when we're caught up in getting what attachment wants, which is a subtler suffering, we think that's happiness. So it's quite subtle, quite hard to see. And we won't see it unless we go deep inside. Lama Yeshe always quotes this. He says, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. You'll never begin to understand it, how it's suffering, until you go deep inside your own mind. It just takes time. So the more we have this understanding of suffering, gross one, easy. Not to mention the subtlest, which is all pervasive suffering, which has been caught up in samsara in the first place, due to delusions, on this treadmill. The more we understand what suffering is by looking at the first noble truth, you can't avoid it. And it's not meant to be depressing. Why? And you've got to look at the big picture. Why do you want to locate what suffering is? And why do you want to locate the causes, which is all you, not anybody else? It sounds initially depressing. Because you want to get rid of it. It's obvious. It's obvious. So then you've got some enthusiasm, not just to beat yourself up more. You've got enthusiasm. The more you recognize suffering, the more you get sick of it, the more you understand the causes, the more you want to get beyond it, the more you rely upon the doctor. So your refuge increases all the time. Your reliance on the Buddha and his methods increase all the time, based upon your recognition of your suffering. Then you can see others. And then second, knowing he's a valid person. A person who's got methods that you can rely upon. So there's this way of formalizing your refuge in the Buddha, as we know, as among Buddhists. We discussed this last week. So we need to know what we're relying upon. We are relying upon the Buddha, but also his methods, his Dharma, because that's the medicine that we take. And then the Sangha. The third one is the Sangha. For the Buddha, the three jewels, as they refer to it, they're the three things we need to rely upon. That's how they talk, So Buddha, as we've discussed, is omniscient mind. Okay, this gets us to a little bit to help us understand now where in this practice when we visualize Buddha, not in the form of Shakyamuni, the monk, but in the form of Vajrasattva, which is the bodhisattva aspect from Tantra. So let's just discuss that briefly, why we do this one. It's just this practice. It's big among the Tibetan Buddhists. It's practice of this purification process, which is of course based on all the Buddha's teachings right back, but it's developed into this little package called the Four Opponent Powers. It's all there in Buddha's teachings, but this has sort of been come into this little practice, and the use of the Buddha Vajrasattva as the object of our refuge, as opposed to Shakyamuni Buddha, and this is done expressed in the third step, as we did the practice yesterday, visualize, and the mantra, because it's said to be one of the most potent practices. So let's look at the idea of the Buddha then. Let's look at what Buddha is. First, like we said last week, Buddha, the actual word Buddha refers to mind, omniscient mind, that's it, enlightened mind. That's the actual Buddha. The actual Buddha, absolute Buddha they call. That's the actual Buddha, enlightened mind. Mind, consciousness, not physical. Right now our mind is stuck in our body, isn't it? Think of using the Buddhist use of the word mind. It's our cognition, our consciousness, our capacity for cognition, our awareness. All this is just mind. It's stuck in this body, isn't it? This bag of bones here. We can't see past our own nose. We don't see past the wall. We can't hear very far. We certainly can't see things that are not the objects of senses, like other people's feelings. We can only see the indicators of them. We can't see the past. We can't see the future. The objects of our cognition are very limited with our very gross consciousness, the way it is at the moment as humans. We don't remember 99% of today, and it's only like 11 o'clock, And we just think, oh, that's normal. Well, for the Buddha, it's mental. It shows deep, deep mental illness. It shows extreme ignorance and delusion. Why? Because he says mind has the potential to cognize the universe. Mind has the potential to cognize that which exists. That's a definition of an existent. The thing that exists, the definition is that which can be cognized by mind. Mm-hmm. We discussed this last week too. We discussed emptiness. Buddha's view of the mind is very different from ours. Not your brain. And then if we use the tantric model, like we talked yesterday, you've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness, levels of our capacity for cognition. So what's the definition of mind? Like we have to define something before we talk about it. We discussed this again last week. We discussed opinion arising. So the first part of any definition, like the cup, what's a cup, the first part of the definition tells you its conventional characteristics. This flat-bottomed clay container with a handle. On the basis of that description, anyone can look there and go, oh yeah, there's a cup. But you're not happy yet. You don't know the second part of the definition, which tells you the most important part. What is its job? What is its function? What does it do? It holds tea, holds liquids, holds your drink, holds your beverage. Okay? Now we know what a cup is. That which is physical, clay container, let's say in this case, that holds tea. Okay, good enough. Now you know. That's a cup. Now we can discuss it. Well, what's a mind? The Buddha's view is very interesting. He says the first part of the definition of mind is conventional characteristics. They use the word luminosity or clarity. That we get all excited there and think it sounds a bit holy, you know. No, it just means it's not physical. That's the meaning. It's not physical. The second part of the definition tells you its job. And the word is, its job, the job of mind, the function of mind is to cognize, to know, to be aware. These words are synonymous in Buddhist psychology. That's what the mind does. It cognizes, it knows, it is aware. Obviously the question is, of what? That which exists. Right now, of course, Buddha is saying our mind is riddled with misconceptions, polluted by delusions that cause it to cognize phenomena that don't exist. Like, self-existent chocolate cakes that will make me happy. That cake does not exist. A cake like that, which is the cake we see, can't exist. It's an impossibility. That's why our job is to know the mind and recognise the pollution, the delusions, which are the cause of suffering, which cause us to see things wrongly. To remove them so we can achieve our own nirvana, which is when we can see things rightly. This is Buddha's way of talking about the mind. So then finally, when the mind is fully enlightened, fully developed, all the delusions completely gone, you've accomplished both wings of the bird, you are now a Buddha mind. Your mind is an enlightened mind. So what are the characteristics of your mind now? Well, your mind being not physical, right now, because of pollution, it is caught, an ego is caught up in this body, sure. But as you progress, you're literally expanding your consciousness. You can say it like that, quite literally. You're expanding your capacity for cognition. The more we are caught up in delusion, the more we're caught up in self-centeredness and neurosis and misery and ego grasping and attachment and anger, we can see it. The more you can't see past your own nose. And, as they say, marvellously in Buddhist psychology, everything appears to you out there in the aspect of all the junk in your mind. So if you're really angry, you're seeing paranoia everywhere, suffering everywhere. I'm reading the biography of Frank Sinatra, like I told you. The poor man, he had unbelievable anger. So he had this nightmare his entire life, raging and fighting with all his wives, raging and fighting with all his mafia friends, fighting, beating people, punching. He saw suffering everywhere. He saw misery and garbage everywhere. He saw harmers everywhere all the time. Why? Because he had anger. It's not rocket science. But our trouble is we think all those people out there make me angry. But the hilarious joke is the Buddha says our mind makes them up. Angry mind causes them to be this way, and then it causes all the problems. So everything appears out there in the aspect of what's in your mind. So if delusions and neuroses are in your mind, you can't see past your own nose. You're full of fear and panic all the time. So you're completely living in a nightmare, like hell all the time. So as you remove those pollutions, weaken them, lessen them, what are you doing? You're increasing the kindness and the love and the compassion and the virtue and the wisdom and the goodness. Well, until you realise emptiness, there's still something polluted about those, but they're relatively speaking in sync with reality. So even before you realise emptiness, as you lessen anger and attachment and fears, so you grow love and compassion and a sense of empathy with others, don't you? And when you have a more sense of connectedness with others, you're more in touch with reality, because that's how reality is. Reality is that things exist interdependently. When you're in your own little isolated sense of a fear, panic-stricken, neurotic little bereft, lonely little me, there's a vivid sense of this concrete me and everything else out there, isn't there? But as you lessen all this, you literally expand your mind, and it encompasses others more and more, doesn't it? Logically, naturally, because that's the way things are. And virtues are in sync with reality to some extent. So as you keep increasing this, keep increasing virtue, lessening delusion, you keep expanding your capacity for awareness, cognition. That means you start to see other people's mind, you start to see the past, the future, as you get better and better and more advanced. It's logical, it's natural. If we posit mind being not physical, that has this job of knowing that which exists, you know. So if a person's mind exists, it's an object of your knowledge, but you have to develop your mind to be able to see it. So in other words, the gross level of consciousness, using that model of gross, subtle, very subtle, the gross level of consciousness has not that capability. It can't. It's not possible, because it functions through the senses. And someone else's mind is not an object of the senses. So as you access your subtle consciousness through meditation, then you can start to develop this business of what's called clairvoyance. It's natural. It's a natural consequence of practice. Buddha says we've had it countless lives in the past. We didn't go deep enough and realise emptiness, so we lost the plot. This is the natural potential of all minds, Buddha says. Natural. Just how it is. So, this mind of ours, an enlightened mind, is a mind that's achieved this potential that we all possess of removing all the pollution from it, which is indicated by the first syllable of the word sangye in Tibetan for the word mind. Sang implies the complete eradication from your mind of all the pollution, the delusions, which are the root cause of all suffering. And the second syllable, ge, Buddha, implies the complete development of all the goodness, which is at the core of your being. And the delusions aren't. They're adventitious, Buddha says, which is an outrageous, radical finding of the Buddhas. The delusions do not belong in the mind. We can rid the mind of them. We can rid the mind of them. They're not at the core of our being. They're not integral to who we are. That's the meaning of adventitious. Who would have known? I'd have used that word in English. I'm going to use that word in my life. Look up the dictionary, you'll see it. Adventitious. This is Buddha's outrageous finding. And this is the job of being a Buddhist. Removing the delusions from the mind. Because they're the cause of all suffering. And we're sick of suffering. So a Buddha mind is a mind that's done that job. And that's the person we have to rely upon. So this is just the pure mind, absolute Buddha. But we can't communicate with that. We're not clever enough, we're too deluded. We can't cognize consciousness. So that enlightened mind, when it's fully developed, naturally, because it's not physical, you think about it, how can it be confined by space or time or matter? It can't be. It's only delusion that keeps our mind in our body. But when you've fully developed your mind, it pervades the universe. How could it not? It pervades wherever there is existence. Enlightened mind exists there. Just like they talk about God. I love that as a kid. God is everywhere. That's how they talk about omniscient mind. Same. Omniscient mind. Buddha mind. That mind also has wisdom, the development of the two wings, complete wisdom, omniscience. Omniscience, just like they talk about God. Omniscience, that seeing all seeing. Seeing that which exists. It means seeing that which exists as it exists correctly. Seeing the truth. That's how Buddha talks. That's the characteristic of wisdom in the omniscient mind. And of course, it includes seeing that which exists, which means all minds exist. So then, the Buddha mind can see all those minds perfectly. The karma of those minds. Therefore, knowing perfectly how to help them. Because that implies the other wing, compassion, which is absolute empathy with every one of those minds that do exist. And because there's no longer a neurotic sense of self that is separate from other minds, that compassion pervades all sentient beings as if they were you. There's no longer a separate sense of self at all as a Buddha. So you have infinite empathy with all those minds, infinite compassion, infinite, and only therefore the wish to help them. The wisdom to know how, because you see their minds perfectly. And the third quality is they call it power, or if you like, omnipotence. All powerful. The Buddha, finally, this is where it sounds completely cosmic, is capable effortlessly, because they're way beyond all the normal laws of normal rubbish. It's all finished, samsara's over. They can manifest their own, and this omniscient mind, okay? With all these qualities, infinite wisdom, infinite compassion, infinite power. But what good is that to sentient beings? Because we can't communicate with it. So out of immense compassion, that Buddha mind then manifests as the relative Buddha, as they call it. And that's the form of the Buddha that we know, that we can see in a form we can communicate with, whose teachings we can hear. And that's the second one, the Dharma. The absolute Dharma is the actual knowledge, the experiential knowledge in the minds of the Buddhas, but not just the Buddhas, but all Arya beings, as they call it, all superior beings, who is anybody from the first moment of non-conceptual insight into emptiness all the way on up to Buddha. They're all called Arya beings. The knowledge in their minds, the actual experiential knowledge, the wisdom of the Dharma, of the truth. That's the absolute Dharma. But what good is that? Until it's written out of kindness, those beings write their words down in books or speak them into microphones and tape them and, video them. That's the relative Dharma. So the absolute Buddha is the omniscient mind, the relative Buddha is the forms. So okay, the classic form taught at this level of the teachings, in the first scope of the teachings, is the according to all the teachings of the individual liberation or pratimoksha, individual liberation, the teachings that you must practice in order to accomplish your own liberation from suffering. This is the form that Shakyamuni Buddha, this one, the monk, is an expression of that level of teachings. Completely controlled, subdued body, speech and mind. That's the relative form of the Buddha, the one we need, because we can't communicate with subtle mind, omniscient mind. So now we have the compassion wing, and this Buddha mind also manifests in forms in the compassion wing in the aspect of the bodhisattva, as they call it. And there's a whole other kettle of fish. There's trillions of these emanations of the Buddha, because Buddha has the capacity to manifest in millions of forms throughout millions of universes. When you read all the sutras, you get to get a feeling of this. Countless Buddhas everywhere. It's all just one Dharmakaya, one Buddha mind, you could say. The word in Sanskrit, Dharmakaya. Truth body, technically means. You could say, it's like Lama Zopa said, it's like the Christian teaching, it's like there's one God. This idea of omniscient mind is like there's one omniscient mind. You could say like that. But trillions of beings become Buddha. And then trillions of that Buddha mind manifests in trillions of forms. So in that sense there are trillions of Buddhas, manifestations. The equivalent of the Christian teachings, isn't it, is God is pure, all-knowing, all-manifest, all-loving being, God, and then Jesus is the manifestation of God, isn't it? Way to say it. Same idea here, except there are trillions, you don't just have one. Trillions of Buddhas. So this is expressed in the Mahayana teachings, the Bodhisattva style, which is a whole other kettle of fish. We talked about that whenever we talked about Tantra. I can't remember what day it was. Friday. So it's the Bodhisattva aspect. More blissful, more radiant. Meant to energize, not subdue. This is subdued. The tantric one, the bodhisattva aspect, which is taught in Tantra, is of the Buddha in this subtler aspect. And if you met the Buddha in that form, it would only be in your meditation. Because all these pictures and statues are descriptions of the Buddha at a subtler level. Only the great bodhisattva yogis in their meditation can see this level of Buddha. The regular Nirmanakaya is the one we see. The emanation body, the enjoyment body, they call it, the Sambhogakaya. Bodhisattvas can see in their meditation. So this is depicted in these pictures and statues. So so the main Buddha is Buddha, up in like a family tree business, up here. Got Buddha, omniscient mind. Then you've got two ways in which Buddha manifests in forms to benefit sentient beings. One is Shakyamuni Buddha, the monk, which is the expression of completely subdued body, speech and mind, which is all the first stages of practice. Controlling your body, living the vows of morality, not harming, not killing, not lying, not stealing, controlling, disciplining, subduing your body, speech and mind. That's the Buddha in the aspect of individual liberation. The monk, he represents that. Then you've got the bodhisattva level, Mahayana level. And then there's millions of these. But the one here, so Shakyamuni is here, and the one here is like the boss Buddha, of all this one, we can call him Vajradhara. I always remember, always quoted when I first heard about the teachings, and I kept doing editing all the prayers, and I was typing and editing, it was my job. And I kept coming up with the name Dorji Chung in Tibetan, and I hear the word Vajradhara, and I liked whoever this, I didn't know it was the same person. One was Sanskrit, one was Tibetan. But this name kept popping up in all the prayers I was typing, and I was attracted to it when I read the word Dorji Chung. And then I heard Vajradhara was a Sanskrit for him. I felt even more happy because he kept popping up. So I asked Lama Yeshe, who's Vajradhara, Lama? Who's Dorji Chung? And he, instead of some deep and philosophical answer, he said, he's the biggest Buddha, dear. And I was very happy to like the biggest Buddha. Being arrogant, Anyway, basically, he's the Buddha in the tantric aspect. Vajradhara, blue body, holding a dorji and bell. Dorji represents the compassion wing, wisdom is represented by the bell, and they're held like this, union of these two, Buddhahood, at that level. So now, if you go across, then you go beneath him, you've got all these got the 5 Buddha families, underneath Vajradhara, 5 Buddha families, each represented by a certain Buddha, and each of them represents a certain quality of mind. Mm-hmm. And then under them are all the other millions, all belonging to these different families. So in other words, it's all psychology, They're all representing qualities of mind. Some represent qualities that delusions you're trying to purify. Some are the qualities you want to cultivate. So, because in Tantra, everything is grist for the mill, based upon the level of the teaching, the level of the development of the yogi, can use attachment, use anger, and transform it into virtue on the path. So, Buddha, omniscient mind, 2 manifestations. For the first scope of teachings, first and second scope, Shakyamuni Buddha, the individual liberation, and he represents, subdued body, speech, mind. Vajradhara in the Mahayana path, under here, sorry, doesn't matter. Mahayana path, Bodhisattva aspect, very blissful, gorgeous, blue, dark blue. And then under him, 5 Buddha families, you could say, all represent qualities of mind. Under them, all the millions of other Buddhas. Male, female, wrathful, peaceful, the whole works. There are countless. We just hear about a few of them. And they're all just manifestations of Buddha mind to benefit sentient beings. That's all. To benefit sentient beings. That's it.
What is meant by demigod then?
Demigod, okay, there's in samsara, like were you here yesterday?
No.
Okay. Okay. Let me finish this one first.
Okay.
Then we'll go there. That's a different discussion. We'll keep it and I'll answer it. Okay. So, I'll answer it now, simple.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's okay. You have, Buddha's, no, we'll do it later. I'm sorry, we'll do it later. I was going to give the whole story. I will have to give the whole story every time. I can't just answer simply, I'm sorry. Okay, so now if you've got Vajradhara there, you go across, not down, you go across and you have a white version of him called Vajrasattva. That's who Vajrasattva. So Vajrasattva is the biggest Buddha, but in his white dress as opposed to his blue dress. And this particular practice of visual, in general, in all the practices in Tantra, which is an aspect of the Bodhisattva path, the more advanced level of the Bodhisattva path, one of the key practices, the key psychological techniques, is to imagine in front of you, well, in all of it, we also imagine one of the key types of meditation that's particularly practiced in the Mahayana tradition, the Tantric tradition, and that it could include visualizing Shakyamuni, is to imagine in front of you the Buddha. And all these practices you take on board as you develop in Tantra, the simplest meaning of it is you have the Buddha out there, and you're seeing it as like a mirror image of your own potential. You're seeing it as, or another way they put it, they say you're seeing that Buddha, who is the Buddha out there, you're seeing as your potential, you in the future. They talk about these practices are bringing the future result into the present. So if you look at the very first level of practice, basically the very first level is you're backing off and leaving sentient beings alone. You're really playing safe. It's like a passive level of practice, although it's not passive. You're not killing, not stealing, not lying, not this, not that. You're backing off. You're harnessing your body and speech. Then you get to the second scope, to high school. Now you begin to harness your mind and begin to understand the delusions which are the cause of suffering. Now you really become a Buddhist. Now in the Mahayana, you can begin to, the Bodhisattva path, you can begin to benefit sentient beings now, because you can now, so subdued, you're not going to make a mess. You'll actually benefit them. And then you get to the postgraduate, the most advanced level, Tantra, and now we can start to practice all these practices, And so one of the key method here in the beginning is you control yourself. You back off. In the Tantra, you're imagining the end result, your own Buddhahood. It's like the ultimate of positive thinking. Mm-hmm. You're thinking of the end result, perfect Buddha. You visualize in front of you. Could be Chenrezig, Buddha of compassion. Could be Tara, kind of power and success. Could be wisdom, Manjushri. Could be Vajrayogini, the purified aspect of attachment energy. You're visualizing this idealist form, and indeed it's come from Tibet, from India. It's coming from a tradition, so you have to learn to know the meaning of it. And you visualize certain things, and then you absorb it into you. Then you visualize becoming that. And then eventually, especially if you've taken empowerment, you then actually finish the practice by or even sometimes all of the practices, you visualize yourself as that Buddha. It's like the ultimate in faking it till you make it. Mm-hmm. And it's they're said to be very potent, quick practices. Mm. But you've got to purify your own rubbish first. So stages of development, These are very tasty practices. So this particular practice of purification, which is actually from junior school, from the first scope, because it's practiced in Tibet, they bring in the Bodhisattva aspect, and the Buddha they're visualizing in this particular practice is Vajrasattva, the white version of Vajradhara, the biggest Buddha deer. Because of the because that's their system in Tibet is the Mahayana Tantric one. And you can do this often without having initiation, is what we did yesterday. We just did it simply. We didn't visualize ourselves as the Buddha. You're not given permission to do that until you receive the empowerment. But you imagine your oneness with it, like we did yesterday. So this Buddha is said to be particularly powerful in relation to purification. And what I've heard is, I haven't heard too deeply, but it is related particularly to emptiness. And why this one? Because when you've realized emptiness, that's the real purification. This practice of the 4 permanent powers, we're not actually pulling out the roots, the seeds, the roots, can't be the seeds, the roots. But you're weakening, you're putting an atomic bomb on the fruit, preventing, holding back their growth of the negative seeds, the negative roots. When you realize emptiness, you uproot. And there's logic to this, but we can't see it, it's not evident to us, but we'll talk about it. So here, the object of our refuge in the second step is Vajrasattva. Okay? So any questions about that? Before we continue? Have a break? Something? Tea break? Whatever. Yeah. Any questions about this so far? So far. Yes.
I just wondered if you could just say what the 5 Buddha families are.
It's not relevant here.
Okay.
I mean, once you start, you've got to go a whole other discussion, I mean, one is Amitabha, one is Atrobia, one is Namanaka, one is the names, but you look and go to Google, you'll read about it. It's good enough for now. It's okay, I'm not trying to be rude or anything. And they each represent different qualities. So Amitabha, for example, he's red. He represents purified attachment. All got different. Akshobhya is blue, represents purified anger. There's a simple way of saying it, there's obviously the more advanced level. Yeah. Any more questions? Yep.
As one goes through the meditation, purification, and this, we come from the same tradition, 8 meat on Friday.
Sorry, Johnny?
8 meat on Friday, go to confession, forgiven, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, you're going to heaven. But in our tradition we had infinity. So you sort of know what you can regret from this life. Okay, but if you're going through the meditation, now you're regretting non-virtuous actions.
From countless past lives, yeah.
From
That's right.
something you can't even conceive.
That's right, yeah.
And the words are, this life, past lives,
That's right.
caused other people to do or
That's right.
rejoiced in. But is that, what is that, how much more specificity can you?
Well, you can't be specific, can you?
Yeah, no.
You can't, and that's okay. Let's say today you come out with a rash on your skin, right? Or what is it when you eat too many chocolates? What comes out when you get too many chocolates? What do we call that?
Pimples. Yes.
Pimples, okay, we call it. Okay, let's say you come out with pimples. And you go, too many M&Ms. Now, you kind of know that generally, don't you? Now, the M&Ms, you did take them in the past, using the past meaning yesterday and the day before. Now, darling, you just have to know the general thing, that pimples are the result of too many M&Ms. It doesn't matter which M&M on what day. You don't need to be specific. You see the result and you know the cause. So what does that make you do? Stop taking more M&Ms, doesn't it? Well, the same here. If we take the view that your consciousness is a beginningless continuity of mental moments, if we take the view that every microsecond you're creating karma in that mind at different stages and different lives, we can deduce logically you've done negative actions. And the point is this: you've left seeds in your little bank. So those seeds are sitting there waiting to ripen. Like those seeds are sitting there waiting to come out as pimples. But so you don't need to know which one you did when. You can pretty much bet you them all. So then by regretting and then doing all the 4 steps, regretting is the first one, which is the acknowledging that I did it. Merely the acknowledging. Oh my God, what an idiot. Look at all the harm I must have done in the past. The killing, the lying, the stealing. And that has left seeds in my mind. And hey, this is the point. I don't want them to suffer as more pimples, do I? I don't want them to ripen, right? You know they're in your mind, you know they're in your body, you know the karmic seeds are in your mind, and you don't want them to ripen as you're suffering in the future. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Well, then you'd better regret them, baby, because that brings you to think, what will I do about it? You rely on the Buddha, you have compassion. Then you do the practice, which is what weakens them, and then you vow never to do them again. It's all logical, it's all part of it. You don't need to be specific. You know, logically you've done them all. The mind is beginningless. If you've been in samsara since beginning of this time, if you've got negativity, you can deduce you've got a bank full of negative seeds, waiting to manifest as pimples. You see my point? Does that answer?
Yes.
Good. Yeah.
Just to go on that, then
Yeah.
therefore, if you heard quote unquote bad deeds, or you hurt
What,
people,
darling?
if you hurt people and you did something bad in your life that you know about, and so then this will also, I don't want this to then affect my future lives, and
That's
it
right.
might be negative effects in my own life. And so therefore you include those specific things. Then
Oh, good.
also.
You start with the ones you know in this
Yeah.
life. I mean, the fact is, if we take on board this view of seeds and fruits, and that every second we're sowing seeds, then we apply this practice every second. You know, every time, if you eat an M&M and you forgot that it's going to cause you a pimple, go, oh, as soon as you eat it, it's the best time to regret. Oh, you don't wait till you have 57 M&Ms, you've got big fat pimples again. You learn in advance and you go, oh my God, I just killed the ant. Right there, before it begins to even multiply once, you go, oh my God, I really regret this. Why? Because I don't want to be born an ant. I don't want to die and have suffering. Then second, you have compassion for the ant. Third, you do a Vajrasattva mantra. And fourth, I will be very careful and never kill an ant again. They always joke about Atisha, who's always so pure and perfect, this 11th century being who went to India from India to Nepal to Tibet. And then it is the basis of the texts that were written, the basis of the Lam Rim, which Tsongkhapa in the 14th century used, which is the basis of the Dharma we're discussing here. Atisha was renowned for keeping his vows really purely and respecting them hugely. He talked about how he'd break his vows like rain. And he's always famous for when he's walking along or riding on his horse and he remembered a negativity, he'd leap off his horse and sit on the ground and do his practice, you know. Okay, you can do that if you like. You can prostrate on the train and do your meditation right there, but you can do it in your mind. And it's like anything. It's like if you're playing the piano, if you're driving on the freeway and you know the rules, you know the don'ts, don't go into the wrong lane, it's dangerous. You don't wait till you've been on a long lane and then got smashed by the car to regret the mistake. You bloody will catch it at that moment before the pimple comes, before the crash comes. So to get ahead of the game is the best. And that's why, when we understand that our mind is caught up in delusion naturally, we are following attachment and aversion and jealousy and fears every day, not to mention mindlessly doing things with our body and speech to harm sentient beings because of our ignorance. This is why, as Lama Zopa says, knowing this, knowing that in one day you're planting thousands of seeds and creating thousands of sets of the 12 links of dependent arising for countless lives every day, the more we understand the teachings, the more we will know the technique, the technology of this, Buddha's view of the universe. The more you are in, he says, the more you know this, I'm saying that part, then quoting Rinpoche, you are insane not to do this practice every day. It's like doing weeding every day. You'd be crazy if you have a magnificent garden with millions of things growing, especially if you're living in the tropics. You're insane not to keep ahead of the game every day. It's just logical. But the key to understanding this and getting a sense of urgency, not like panic and neurosis, is understanding that every microsecond we're sowing seeds. But we don't think like that. It doesn't seem like that. We don't even get the meaning of that. We know we're thinking something every second, but that's the key, because every thought is an intention. Intention means karma. Karma leaves a seed. So the more we think of this, the more we're cautious in the day, and the more, just to be on the safe side, we'll finish our day with these 4 opponent powers. It's very powerful, psychologically very reasonable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So you start, to help your mind, you've got to think of the things that happen. It's not just abstract. You've got to remember that abortion, or remember the person you badmouthed today. And there's always, if we have intense families with 14 different kids and husbands, you've got to be shooting your mother all the time. So you've got to remember the things of today and feel it and hear it and see it and realise I'm sick of this. Not out of guilt. It's very hard not to have guilt. But because I'm sick of the suffering. I'm fed up with this. And it makes you take responsibility. You've got to remember those things. And then you add, and whatever I've done since the beginning of this time, you know. You add that as just to remember. You might as well get the lot in. If you remember the ones now, it's very tasty. And then when you go to the second step, and you do, now we're going to get to this one, compassion in a minute, after refuge, then you think of those you harmed today. You try to have compassion for that person. You regret for that person's sake, if you like. Have compassion for this person. I must purify, I must. And then, of course, the 4th step is I vow not to do it again. That's when you make decisions for your sake and, of course, others. So it's important to engage in it in a real way. Many people have taken initiation to Vajrasattva say, oh, I've done my, you commit when you do that. You commit to doing, say, 21 mantras a day. Most people say, oh yeah, I've done my Vajrasattva practice. Just mindlessly done the mantras. But you don't engage in the 4 steps. And it's the 4 steps, as Lama Yeshe says, what purification is the power of regret, the power of reliance, the power of the practice, of the remedy, and the power of resolve. It's a psychological process that you need to engage in, and it's you doing it for you. If you don't engage in the steps and the thinking, you won't change. The 4 steps are the most powerful. That's why in this refuge business, talking about the Buddha now, when we get the meaning of refuge, as a, nothing wrong, as you mentioned, about the one, it's the Christian one, the Catholic one, if we've been Catholic, you go to God and you must ask God to forgive you. That is what purification is, isn't it? That's what it is.
Le pardon.
Huh?
Le pardon. In French, le pardon is a very powerful practice.
I understand, exactly, forgiveness.
Oui, le grand pardon. It's not just a little white lie that people create.
I understand.
Mais vraiment, this one that comes inside of you, and you free yourself from the cause of your birth.
I understand.
Of the depth of understanding of the nature of that omniscient in yourself.
Okay, that's good. That sounds wonderful. It sounds very similar to the Buddhist one.
With that reflection.
I understand.
That depth of reflection of the wonder and the beauty. Because in everything you speak about today for me brings a lot of joy. Not in a darkness.
I understand, darling.
But the nature of the way you present to yourself, within yourself, what you call unpacking, the nature of the future, which is, I'm not too sure, that it's only of this dimension, by the nature of what you shared about the Bodhisattva versus the relative Buddha of the first scope. So I'm learning a new language, which is more exciting to me than technology.
I understand.
So that space, I had a mentor from Melbourne once, an encounter that was extraordinary by the nature that this man was a very, very renowned psychiatrist. And the cause of the birth was his shtick of how you come into your own birth.
Okay, where was all this going now? Is there a question coming, or just you want to tell me about this?
No, I'm interested in the practice of the nature in the present moment of the future.
Okay, that's the method. That was mentioning in passing the different type of Buddha, but now I'm just talking about the actual meaning of relying upon the Buddha. That's the other discussion. That's more about Tantra. And I'll just mention in passing the Buddha coming from that tradition, but that's not the discussion in this practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. So, okay. I'm talking about forgiveness, okay? The difference here. If I am a devoted Catholic, she very nicely put it all, but if I'm a devoted Catholic, depending on your depth of your understanding of God, then the part of it is to beg the forgiveness of God. I know that is marvelous, and that's implied because you're the source of you is God. But here, the view is different, is all I'm trying to point out. Buddha is like God in the sense of being omniscient, or knowing, or compassionate, or wise, infinitely blissful, all these things. But the difference is in the Buddhist view, was ordinary first and becomes a Buddha. He's not inherently a Buddha. So, the relationship, I'm saying here, putting it in a very simple way, that we have with the Buddha is the one of a mentor, the one of a doctor, not the one of a creator. Therefore, the purification process does not include your being forgiven, because that implies a person who has the power to forgive you is a person who's the boss, whom you offended. The point here is not that. By harming others, we harm others and we harm ourselves. Buddha is a messenger who points this out, as opposed to the creator of this. And that can be seen as a very subtle or a very gross way, but there's a crucial point. So therefore, in this process of purification, the refuge in the Buddha is not begging him to forgive us, but is relying upon him and his methods, which I can then take, the medicine I can then take, which is what then does the purification. So the purification isn't just the third step, which we did yesterday, where we visualize the nectar coming coming from the Buddha. We utilize the Buddha as part of our technique. We utilize the Buddha. We imagine the Buddha sending the nectar. We imagine this, but it's me doing it that is the process of purification, but it's all the 4 steps. So, you know, and I can put it in ordinary terms now, forget creators and Buddhas. If we look into our ordinary deluded way with our relationships, because we have this dualistic view of the self-existent me, which brings guilt and shame and fear, and then desperate attachment to be approved of by others, if, you know, Fred is my husband and I'm mean to Fred, then I desperately am panic-stricken that Fred might give me up, aren't I? So I'm desperate to look Fred in the eye and to make sure he's still got love there. And please, and I mean it, compassion is there, but it's very polluted by my attachment at the moment. My approval, my attachment to approval, because I'm terrified he will reject me. Please, Fred, forgive me. And then he smiles, oh, I still love you, Robina. The immense relief, isn't it? So we think that's healing, and it can be, but often it's because of attachment. Can you hear that? It's a very scary one. And that now the trouble is this. Fred forgave me. He got me off the hook, didn't he? So now I can relax again. But until I do the 4th step, which is I will never do it again. I will just still keep doing it again. And at some point, Fred, you know, patience will break and he might stop forgiving me. So we are very much in our own relationships desperate to be forgiven, thinking that that will make me better. That's now, he's forgiven me, now I'm better. I'm clean. Not until you've done the
That
work.
is required, though, to say, I will never do that again?
Huh?
That's a required part of this?
This practice, absolutely. Otherwise, how will you change? It's the practical part, isn't it? And we have to first acknowledge I did something. I have to first acknowledge I ate too many M&Ms. I have to own it. I can't blame Mr. M&M Company. I've got to say, I took the M&Ms. Stupid fool. Look at the suffering it's going to cause me. Then I have to, so I know the causes of the suffering, my pimples. I have to acknowledge that. Then I have to think, well, whom can I turn to? I better go get the, you know, the medicine here as well. You know, I've got to be told by I've got to be told by my doctor, don't take any more M&Ms. You understand? Yeah. I have to rely on that doctor and be confident. Then I've got to do the practice and whatever you like. You know, stop eating M&Ms. But then I've got to vow never to do it again. Because if I don't make a decision, my attachment will be weak and will force me to doing it again. So that's the 4th one, the most important, because that's when you make the changes. But I'll only decide never to do it again if I've regretted it and seen that it's causing me suffering. So if I just have guilt and misery and then need you to forgive me, I'll never bother to vow never to do it again because I feel so relieved, I feel all white and clean again. You see what I'm saying? Is that answering your question?
Yeah.
You sound doubtful.
Well, I'm just thinking of trying to make an analogy that I can somehow embrace and take.
So M&M's is not working for you. Okay, well,
I'm thinking of the seed, the root, and let's say a lawn of karma growing. And do I have to trim the entire lawn?
No, I think now it's getting too. I can't understand. It's too conceptual for me. I don't get that one.
Do I not go to the next level until I've completely cleaned off this?
No, nothing like that. Not like that. You're just incremental. Can't you just? Okay, can you? You can surely see in your own mind that you've got a bunch of habits. Would you agree you've got a bunch of habits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And you can see that some are negative and cause problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and you can see some are good and cause virtue. So you've got to increase your wish to keep doing the good ones, surely. And you've got to keep reminding yourself, stopping to do the bad ones. If you never remember to do the bad ones, if you never remember to say, I won't do the bad one, you'll keep doing it because the habit is strong. So all that 4th step is very simple. It's you saying, I will never eat more M&Ms, or I will never kill. And you have a vow you'll never kill, and every day you never kill. So what you're doing is you're weakening and eventually from the root uprooting the habit to never kill. So that next life you'll get born with no tendency to kill whatsoever. So it's a practical, psychological thing of practicing something. The more we do something, the more we're better at it, isn't it? So if you keep saying, I'll never kill, you keep getting better at not killing, won't you? Until eventually that becomes your habit. That becomes your instinct. Does that make sense? That surely makes sense.
Yes.
Okay, that's the real point about it. So, we rely upon the Buddha because we've checked on the Buddha's teachings and we want to become, here we've got also the Mahayana component because I also want to become the Buddha. So we rely on his practices. Then the second part here now is where we now cultivate compassion. And I remember I discussed briefly yesterday, but you mightn't have got it, you know. What compassion, why compassion here is under the heading of reliance. It sounds peculiar to us. What does it mean? reliance. Well, the way they talk, the Tibetans talk like this. What we're trying to do in this second step, in the second part, is now my practice is to cultivate compassion. The first step is me to cultivate renunciation, which is like compassion for myself. Now I want to cultivate compassion for others. And of course, it's for those I have harmed, and if you're brave enough, for those who've harmed you. And what's compassion? So that means we have to analyse what compassion is. Precisely. But why is it called reliance? Because the way they talk, if you think about it, if you're trying to cultivate compassion, what do you need to see and know about right in front of you? What do you need to have in front of you every day? Okay, compassion is empathy for the suffering of others, right? So what do you need in front of you every day to cultivate compassion? Other people suffering. You don't want them to suffer, so the way they put it is you're relying upon you're relying upon suffering sentient beings. Can you hear the point? If you can't, say so, I'll explain it again. It's a peculiar way to talk. But you will never cultivate, if you're a doctor, your wish is to heal people, but if you never meet sick people, how can you become a doctor? So you need sick people, don't you? So it's like that. You need sick, suffering people. You don't want them to suffer, so they use it that way. You're relying upon. Okay, so compassion. Let's again unpack this. We know that word well. We like the sound of it. We wish we could have it. But let's really, I said it briefly and I said it yesterday, let's analyse very carefully, again, logically, technically, what it is, according to this view. So, okay, in general, compassion is a thought, bare bones, is a thought, a wish, an aspiration, a wish, or empathy with suffering of others. You see a person suffering and it's the thought, oh, look at that suffering. May you not suffer. That is a thought of compassion, which of course we have to grow. So to be clear then, if there's a person suffering, we say we have compassion for them, we'd better know what suffering means. So like I said, the normal view we have of suffering when we think of compassion is for people who are the victims. And unfortunately for us, that usually comes down to children and animals. Because we want to find an innocent victim, don't we? Mm-hmm. Desperate for innocent victims. And that is because of the entire philosophy we have right now in the bones of our being, that a person who gets harmed, the only one who's worthy of compassion is a person who doesn't deserve it. And you look at how we think in our mind when people harm us, the first thing arises is, I don't deserve it. Is this not true? Is this not so powerful in us? So of course, speaking technically here, Buddha would say there's no such person. Speaking in a very simple way. Because if we're all the product of the law of cause and effect, if we're all bound up in the law of karma, and Buddha says we are because we've all got minds, and karma is played out by the mind, in the mind, is done by the mind, helped by body and speech, then we're all a product of our past actions, necessarily. Just the way it is. Equal status. In other words, all the flowers and all the weeds in your garden are all the result of seeds you planted because, hey baby, it's your garden. So therefore, every moment a person has suffering, it is necessarily, the main cause of it is necessarily the seed of negativity, of a negative action motivated by a delusion planted in that mind in the past, which now ripens as suffering. So therefore, every sentient being right there, every sentient being is worthy of compassion, logically. It's got nothing to do with do they deserve it or not. And then of course we get shocked and horrified when we think, well, you mean a child deserves cancer, deserves the rapist father. And that's heavy duty for our mind. Because our minds are riddled at the moment with the philosophy of blame, reward, victim, oppressor, the dualistic view of, therefore innocence and guilt, But that's all part of the philosophy we have in our minds at the moment that takes a lot of time to unpack because the Buddha's view doesn't talk like that. It's a different philosophical position, a different explanation entirely. And it just takes time to unpack it all and then get familiar with this one, to use this one in our mind. Because actually this one of victims and innocent and not fair and poor me and blame and others as well is very deep inside us. It's the nature of ego to think like this. So, first point is that all sentient beings we see being harmed by others, which is the first level of suffering in the first noble truth, which we have to get down in the first of the four opponent powers in the process of regretting. Here we're applying it to others now, and we're seeing the whole world is full of people being harmed, suffering, terrorism, violence, wars, poverty, all this. But then if we look deeper at suffering and look at the second kind of suffering in the second noble truth, in the first noble truth, the second kind of suffering, which again we have to get clear about in order to have regret and renunciation, is the suffering of change, which is the suffering of being caught up in attachment, which gives rise to anger and jealousy and depression and low self-esteem and all the other stuff. So then that includes a whole lot more people on the earth, doesn't it? It includes people like us who we don't think are suffering. It includes all the nice middle-class people, who've got their nice houses and jobs and hubbies and kids and go to school and have their cars and their 2 cars or whatever. We think, come on, they're not suffering. No, when you understand this understanding of suffering, that includes all of them as well, because they're all caught up in the inner prison, which is worse than the outer prison, as Rinpoche put it. The prison of delusions, the prison of attachment, the prison of neurosis, the prison of guilt, the prison of shame, the prison of low self-esteem and self-pity and not fair and poor me. Believing in that view, that's intense suffering, because it's the root of all the other. But then this will also include having compassion for the people who do the harm. That's a big ask for us in our world of innocent victims. Why would I have compassion more for the pilots on September 11? That sounds beyond shocking, basing it upon the usual philosophy of innocent victims. Because we love to hate the evil person who did it. The more evil they are, the more compassion we have for the victims. If it were just, somehow, I'm not being mean here, but analyse, if the building just fell down by accident, we wouldn't have really much, I'm not sure we'd have so much compassion, but we get energised to have compassion the more we can hate the people who did it. It's kind of interesting. Not being mean here. Look at our minds. We can galvanise into the hate for those evil people. The more they are evil, the more we have compassion for these innocent victims. It's kind of interesting. But when we have this view of karma, Buddha's view, then we're going to include having compassion even more. The Bodhisattva's heart will break even more for the pilots. Why? I said it before, but let's unpack it. Based upon the view of karma, it's logical. They have been the victims of the past. And their rage and hurt and resentment and bitterness cause them to have this birth, to be born into a certain philosophical view which they've got that says that it's actually good to kill as many people as possible for God. I mean, that's, talk about delusion. Excuse me. And full of the loathing and rage every moment that motivated them to want to do that, thinking it's a good thing. Now, if that's not delusion, I don't know what is. And therefore, the suffering that can come from this, I can't even conceive. Countless eons of lives of suffering. Kurukulla. So, like a mother who's got lots of kids, some are really nice, behave well, and then there's one who's a junkie. She probably has more compassion for him. And very simple, why? People can't stand it. He lies, he steals, but she can see he's harming himself. And that's the point. That's the real basis of real compassion. That you see that every single sentient being is caught up in this insane asylum of being harmed and thinking you're an innocent victim and blaming everybody else, which sets you up for more suffering in the future. The one who's doing the harming, who's full of rage, who's been the victim, who's now harming others, will be the victim again. The one who's the victim now, who's angry and bitter and resentful, will become again the victim. It just is like a vicious circle going around and around, life after life after life after life after life. Suffering and causing suffering. Suffering and causing suffering. Because, according to the Buddha, we haven't got it right yet about what causes it all. And we're living in all these misconceptions of fear and rage and blame and guilt and neurosis. This is enough to break any bodhisattva's heart, they say. This is the main basis for why bodhisattvas have compassion. Because we don't even have the view of karma. Forget about ignorance that realise it doesn't, that is the deepest cause. We don't realise emptiness. But there's ignorance of not knowing cause and effect, which is why we keep harming and being harmed. This is the basis of compassion. This is the basis of regret, renunciation for myself. And then it's the basis of compassion. So that includes every single sentient being without exception, because we're all in the same insane asylum together. And the basis of this is the understanding of karma. So, you can't escape karma when it comes to Buddha's teachings. Many people think it's just an added strange thing. I met some people recently at one centre where they kind of like more social Buddhists, you know, and they don't even go anywhere near karma and reincarnation. They don't touch it. And she admitted, one of them admitted it because they feel afraid of what people think. We leave it alone. Many Buddhists will never even talk about it. It's insanity. It's without this, you don't understand Buddhism at all. It's like a nonsense. Anyone can teach you how to be mindful. That's not Buddhist unique. That's nothing. Anyone can teach you about, being good to others. That's shared by good communists. It's not unique to the Buddha. The unique thing to the Buddha is karma. Not even the karma. Hindus have karma. But Buddha's explanation of it and his application of it in a life of a Buddhist is absolutely fundamental. And it leads to emptiness, which is the unique one of the Buddha. Because karma is cause and effect, and cause and effect is the first level of dependent arising, and dependent arising is the king of logics that proves emptiness. And it's the way you transform your life. It's the basis of you changing, and it's the basis of compassion for others. So we should have a tea break, huh? Definitely. Yeah, have a tea break. Then questions. Thank you, darlings. Compassion. The way we look at what compassion is based on the idea of karma. Any questions about that? Makes sense? No? Makes sense, yeah? Okay.
I'd like
Yeah,
to go
go.
back to the follow up with the M&Ms and the doing the fourth renunciation.
The 4 steps of purification.
Yeah, and the fourth step. I think
Vowing not to do it again.
I think it seems from a definitely Western Catholic bringing. It's hard to. I liked yesterday when we said, "I vow not to do it today."
Mm-hmm.
But it seems almost like I'm living a lie to say I'll never eat an M&M again. When I know
But you don't, that's the point. You only vow to do the things you know are really more serious and you really know that you don't want to do again. You don't vow never to get depressed again or angry if your deepest happens. As Lama Zopa says, you don't lie to yourself. The ones, okay, so if we're looking, go back to the beginning of Buddha's instructions in the beginning about how to practice. The very first level of practice, he exhorts us, as I said, it's just a list of 10 things. The first 7 are the main things about harming sentient beings. It says don't kill, don't cheat on partners, and don't steal. It doesn't say don't punch, don't push people in the line at the movie. It doesn't say the milder things. It gets to the main things of the body and then the main things of the speech. If we can even begin to commit to live according to this is a really, a powerful thing. But you see, this is also the problem, where we tend to think of spiritual as morality and we get all scared. Would you agree that you've effectively made a vow, I will never drive into the wrong lane on the freeway? You've made that vow, haven't you?
Yes.
And you're not afraid to make that vow?
Not at all.
Why?
Because to the best of my ability.
But why were you not afraid to say that? I will never drive in the wrong lane. Why?
Because I don't want to.
That's right, and because you don't want the consequences.
Right.
So you're prepared to risk knowing with certainty, I will never drive in the wrong lane with intention. You don't say, well, I don't know what will happen tomorrow, I just might drive in the wrong lane. How can I lie to myself? Excuse me, you'll be dead in a minute.
Right.
So when we really know the dire consequences of certain actions, and this is what here we're talking about, the Buddhist view of karma, that your killing sentient beings causes you to have suffering in the future. When the more you understand this, the more you'll be energized to make the decision, I will never kill again. This is the first point. Does that make sense?
It does.
So you don't lie to yourself and say, I'll never be angry again, because you know you can't control that, because it's a very deep habit. But then you might say, for 24 hours, you take those incrementally, the ones you really know that are very deeply ingrained.
Yes.
Do you understand?
I do.
So now, there's another point that's really crucial that we never think about. Not only will my determination every day, which I reiterate when I do this practice, I will never kill again. Not only will it strengthen the habit in me to never kill again, but it will actually protect me from even having to kill.
Okay.
Because if my meeting sentient beings who seem to, if you live in a house overrun by cockroaches, we feel I don't have a choice but to kill. well, why the cockroaches are there in the first place is because I've got some heavy karma with them from harming each other in the past, and so here we are meeting each other again. Or how come I'm born in a country where I'm forced to eat fish, and which means in the old-fashioned days the Eskimos had to fish. Well, that's due to your karma, that you're even born in a situation where you're meeting sentient beings who need killing. You understand what I'm saying? So by having the bravery to say, I'm sick of killing and I will never kill again, it not only ensures that habit will get deeper and deeper. You might have to work hard and avoid killing, but you know the consequences and you don't want to do that because you are sick of the suffering, not out of guilt.
Right.
And then slowly, that will cause you, because we're all intelligent, to be creative enough to find other methods to get food, other methods to deal with the cockroaches, and eventually next life, baby, or even don't be surprised in this life, you're going to move into houses and go to countries where you won't ever have to even meet sentient beings to kill, because you've purified it. Do you see?
I do.
Okay, so this also gets us, before we finish the 4 steps, and this is in your notes as well. Each of these 4 steps, we've talked about how there are 4 ways your karma ripens, the tendency, the experience, the type of rebirth, and the environment. We talked about that yesterday, remember? Mm-hmm. Okay, so these 4 steps, each of them has a specific function. All of them all together are the process of purifying, but each of them specifically has a particular function to purify one of those 4. So, regret is said to purify, particularly the kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause. So the more we think of karma as done by the mind, and the more we think that whatever we do with our mind produces what we do with our body and speech, the more we think about how we're all social creatures and do things with our body and speech to other sentient beings, and the more we then realise that we're going to keep meeting each other, because that's what produces us to keep meeting each other and have war zones or peaceful zones, because we created the cause to have all that by doing it in the past, the more we'll understand that if it's the result of my own actions that people harm me, then my vowing never to harm them will help them stop harming me. It's not rocket science. You see my point? So, regret particularly has the function of purifying the experience similar to the cause. So in relation to killing, for example, if I regret the killing I've done, the roaches, the rats, the this, the that, the baby, whatever, because I don't want the karmic results. In the long term, that's in general the basis of my regretting, because I don't want to have lower realm suffering, I don't want to get killed by others, I don't want to keep killing, and I don't want to have the environmental result. That's the basis of regret, remember? So in particular, what that regret will do will purify the kind of karma of me being killed or dying young, which is the one called experiences similar to the cause. So Warren Buffett, for example, who's 87 or getting on for 90, as fit as a fiddle, living on his Coca-Cola and his ice cream and his hamburgers, as his daughter said, as I mentioned, she's never seen water pass his lips. Okay, he had prostate cancer recently, but he got better. So we have to deduce that in the past he has purified the causes. He's purified the killing, the causes of killing, the consequences of killing, the particular one called dying young or being sick. Clearly, he has got the karma called experience similar to the cause of non-killing in the past. And the Buddha would say that by regretting killing, this is a powerful way to make that one happen. And don't even be surprised in this life if you sincerely regret the killing you've done, that can start to help you heal your health. You understand? Or prevent you being harmed by others or killed. Because if everything happens to us as a result of what we've done and what we think and what we say, then purification is also doing and saying things that will bring its own results. The second one, environmental karma, is purified by regret and compassion and refuge. And it seems to be the compassion one, by sincerely thinking of compassion for others, for those who've harmed us. This, they say, this purifies experience, the environmental result around us, the way the environment affects one, which affects us, which includes sentient beings. The third one, the main practice, the visualization of the Buddha, the mantra, the method that's called applying the antidote, that purifies lower realm suffering, being born in the lower realms as a result of killing, for example. And the fourth one is the most obvious, the most not rocket science. Obviously, if every day I vow never to kill, guess what that purifies? The habit to keep killing. It's sort of obvious. So this is practical. So that's why I've got to be realistic. So at least if we can get down to not killing and not lying, and the big ones, the major ones, and then remember that by saying I will never kill today, then I will never kill today, and then I reiterate it again tomorrow. So every day I'm strengthening that habit. And it's not just, you see, we think of words as sort of being a bit empty and meaningless, but words program your mind. It's thoughts, it's karma, it's action, it's intention, it's programming your mind. So every day you get braver and braver and braver and braver. It's like playing piano every day. You're not surprised if you keep getting better at it. We call it practice. Well, here you're practicing changing habits by starting with the thought, because everything starts with the thought. My hand is the one that does the killing, but excuse me, it doesn't have its own little brain. It's sitting here doing the wishes of my thoughts. So if my thoughts every day are, I will not kill, guess what my hand will do? It'll stay quietly, you know. So it's not rocket science really. And it gives you the courage. You've got to be a bit courageous. Because it's sort of like people often say, well, you know, you don't want to commit to anybody. Oh, I don't want to get married. I don't want to commit to you. I can't say that because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But this is what's interesting about what commitment is. Commitment to never killing, or commitment to a certain person. If every day you say, I am committed to live with this person and make the most of it, well, every day you're going to do exactly that. But if you don't commit, you're always hedging your bets. You know, you wait, you're going to try to find a way out. Well, what if that person, I might have to kill tomorrow, so I don't want to say I won't kill. Well, then of course you'll keep killing. You'll never change. You've got to have courage to commit. Commitment is accountability. Commitment is saying, I'm responsible, I'm in charge, and it's up to me, and until I decide to do it, nothing will ever change. We'll just stay on the edge of the pool, we'll never jump in. And that's where most people stay teenagers. They never grow up, you know, they don't commit. Commitment is growing up and saying, I'm in charge of my life. And then it's the cause of being successful at whatever you do. You can see it, can't we? Got to be courageous to make some new decisions. We know that. We know the wake-up call we get. Okay, if you go to AA, they have this thing, and it's very skillful. You're 24 hours you won't drink. It's very skillful. But you have a real sincere wish in your mind that tomorrow's another 24 hours, and you're going to do the same thing. So it's the same way, the same in a sense, you know. And also the power of a vow, when you're really serious about it, it's in the front of your mind. And they say vows protect you. It's a fact. Even think ordinary vows. I mean, I always joke about, you know, the one, years and years when I did Kung Fu, years ago, karate. Naturally, I did it a lot, 6 days a week. I got really fit, which means I lost some of my, body weight, naturally. And then after a while, when I gave it up, suddenly I realised it's 25, 30 years ago. So it feels like yesterday, because you get older, you go quicker, So I remember thinking, I'd say over the years, I better lose some weight. I better lose some weight, you say. I better lose some weight. Well, excuse me, just saying I better lose some weight, it's never going to happen. Or people say, oh, you must come for a meal one day. Oh, I'd love to come for a meal. But it never happens until you say what? Come for a meal and open the diary and put the date in. That's commitment. Or until I finally said, it was March 12, 2012, whatever year that is, never mind. March, I remember I was in a month's retreat doing some editing, and I finally said to myself, I will go on a diet. I will lose weight. Then I started to lose weight. And then, of course, when I made the commitment to myself, and I mentioned my diet, it was a special diet called eating less. Eating less. I got the number of calories, the tipping point for my body. That's very simple. So it wasn't until I finally said, I will do it. And that's what commitment is. That's what accountability is. Not I should, would, if only, why not, maybe. And that's where we go mad in our heads, living in the shoulds and woulds and guilt and shame, because we never commit to do it. And then it protects you, because every day you remember your vow. And there's the food, and my vow wins every time, when it's strong. So this is, all it is indicating the power of our own mind, but we don't trust the power of our own mind. We trust circumstances more. That's why we're like victims of a chocolate cake, or victims of the killing of the roaches, because we think that's more powerful than me. We have got to realise we are powerful, and that's what this practice is also helping us see. It's our mind, we are the boss. Do you understand? Someone else? Yeah.
Are we contributing to killing when we eat animals that have been killed?
Are we doing what?
Are we, what is the status with not being vegetarian?
So the question is, what karma do we create?
Yeah.
Well, it's very complex. It's hard. Every situation is different, isn't it? So if you're, if there's a million situations you could have. So let's analyse it. We talked yesterday about how the conditions that have to be in place in order to any karma we create, any action we do, to be what's called the fully ripened result. So we looked at, there has to be the intention. You're here, so they want you, of course you were. There has to be the intention to do something. Then there has to be the object. In terms of killing, there's got to be intention to kill. Then there's the object, the fish, let's say. Then there's the action. You kill the fish. The fish is there. You do the action, and then it dies. That's called a complete action of killing. You agree with that? Okay. So we also can see if there's no intention there, even if the fish did die, there's still a dead fish, and you're still involved with it, but your mind's not involved, so there can't be too much karma, or if any, because your mind didn't do it. Your mind creates karma. Do you understand? Okay. So there's a fish on your plate, and you're about to eat it. What's the name of this action? What's the name of this action you're doing?
I'm eating.
Okay, so what's the intention in the mind?
To feed it my...
No, what is the intention in the mind? The
Mind.
thought. Simple thought. What is the thought?
Eat.
I will eat. It's called, what's the intention? I will eat.
I will eat.
I will eat. Okay, that's not the same as I will kill, is it?
No.
Go one step at a time, okay? So simply speaking, an example would be, so you can't say it's the same as a complete action of killing. It's just not. We know intellectually that a fish was killed by somebody. Now, if you killed the fish, then there's two things going on. One, you killed the fish. Then two, you're eating fish, and there's no relationship, except that you killed it out of attachment so you could eat it. That shows the motivation for the killing, doesn't it? Do you see? So the killing is still the killing is the point. It's just the same, and this might sound shocking, but I want to say it purposely. In the teachings in France a couple of months ago, a woman was there who was a psychologist in a prison, and she was telling us about these two brothers who had killed one of the brother's girlfriends so they could eat her heart and her fingers and her legs and everything, so they like to eat human flesh. Now, of course, in the West, most of us are horrified by that, as if that's the evil crime. Excuse me. A lamb's heart, a human heart, not much difference.
No.
Please get my point here. The part that was worse was the killing. But we get so caught up in the eating part. That's why we get so upset about vegetarian. Of course it's wrong. No, excuse me, start again. We have to look at all the different consequences. So actually, as Nick Rinpoche, who's a vegan now, who comes to the centre, he's been here for years, who was a director, who's in Boston, doing Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. He's a vegan now, and as he points out, killing the fish is not, eating the fish, drinking milk is far heavier in terms of suffering. There's far more suffering for cows, because as he pointed out, they suffer all their life in brutal circumstances, have their milk ripped out of their bodies in the most dreadful circumstances, than the fish who just gets killed. So in one sense you could say drinking milk is worse, if you think of the relationship between that and the suffering of the sentient being who gave the milk. So there's many, many things we have to think about, Do you understand? And then, of course, the Buddhist point is that because the universe is pervaded by sentient beings, just existing, you're harming sentient beings. And then even all the veggies you eat, there's countless more sentient beings who died than they did if you eat one piece of meat. Or the tiny creatures who got squashed and drowned in the thing and killed and slaughtered and smashed on the windscreens when you drove the veggies to the market and all this. There's trillions of sentient beings. But anybody who's a vegan or a Buddhist as well, because the basis is harming sentient beings, would say, I was just talking to Nick recently, and he said, well, you do your best you can. You limit the best you can. And of course the reason to not eat the thing is because you're attempting to have compassion for the sentient beings who suffered, But you see, there's many things to think about here too. We've got in other words, one way to put it maybe, I would say, the real benefit of being a vegetarian is not to the animals. They're going to keep getting killed because they have the karma to be killed. The demand in the industry of killing fish and killing chickens and killing lambs is so sophisticated on this earth and so you have the sentient beings who've got the karma to be killed. You've got the sentient beings who kill them, who've got the karma to kill in the slaughterhouse, the fishermen, the lobsterers, the lobster fishermen. They're going to do it regardless. And to the point, my sense is, even if the demand is less by all the people becoming vegetarian, you're just going to have a glut of fish in the fish fridges and a glut of lobsters, And even then, it depends. It's really hard to see. So we tend to think, I'll be a vegetarian, so I'll lessen the demand, so it's going to lessen the suffering of animals. In a small town, it might have been this way. When you can see the effect of the number of goats that get killed if you stop eating meat, that's evident. Mm-hmm. But I think in the world with its sophisticated, systems and the global industries, don't hold your breath. the sentient beings to stop getting killed. So the one benefit has to be for your own self, the compassion. That is very powerful. The compassion for the suffering sentient beings, you know. Not to be involved in that, because we eat with attachment, don't we? So then to go against your attachment, to not drink that milk or not eat that fish, because you're empathising with the pain of the sentient beings who produced it, that's very powerful. It's a marvellous practice. But don't think less cows are going to suffer, maybe. Don't think less fish will get killed. So there's many ways to look at it. But the real one is for the benefit of, you know, if you can save the lives of animals, that's an extra bonus, that's amazing. But the real one is one's own practice, it seems to me. Does that make sense, people?
Yeah.
If you're going to do it. In general, where how karma works, and it's obvious, it's evident, you can see it, the closer you are to any action, the more powerful the virtue, the more powerful the karma. So the closer you are, you know, let's say you're the one who rushes out and saves the person from dying under the car. You risked your life to help them. Well then after this, there's going to be the ambulance worker, the people, the hospital, all the other people are involved too, but you're the one who did the most intense work. And anybody else who supports you has got some connection to that action. You understand? They're the one, like say the person, maybe the person on the sidewalk who stops the other cars while you go out there, and so they've got a connection too. But you're the one who's directly there, who had the thought, oh my God, I must save that person. You're the most directly involved. That's the most powerful karma of all. And then people who support you, there's still a relationship to it, but less. So the same with killing. It sounds cruel. We all like to think, because we love to blame. We all like to think the people who demand and that could be in a small village. If I'm sitting there and we're all sitting at the restaurant and we say, well, I want more goat, come on. Then 6 of us all demanding our goat and the poor fellow's got to rush out and kill the goat. Then you could say we are, because we're so close to the action, it's even heavier than if we just went out and killed the goat. Because we've also got someone else to do our bidding for us. So there's lots of things to think about, you know. Do you understand? Yes, darling.
Well, we're all walking on the same land, so in that sense, we're all close to each other.
So then?
Close to the
That's
action
right,
of
true.
killing.
So what's the point in relation to this?
Well,
what's
just
the conclusion?
I don't think there's really any difference between, well, I shouldn't say any difference, but I think demanding goat in a restaurant and demanding an animal imported from an airplane are very
So the
similar.
thinking I just did here didn't convince you? All the logic I was just using
Well,
here
just because
about the closeness and the distance from the action.
I like that logic.
Yeah.
But then I said to myself, well, really, we're all standing on the same land, so it's one big earth and we're all standing on the land, so we're very close in that sense. What about recommending Shabkar's food for bodhisattvas?
What did I?
Shabkar's food for bodhisattvas, for people who want to read more about
What's Shabkar? Sorry, what? What's the
that
name?
Buddhist saint, I believe, who lived in the 17 and 1800s, who wrote a book called Food for Bodhisattvas.
Yeah, what was the book about?
The Buddhist teachings on meat eating.
Oh, okay. No, there's stuff out there, isn't there?
Sharon Cardamone loaned it to me.
Oh, did she?
This week, and
Oh, okay.
I read it. And
Oh, wonderful.
It was, you know, it's a very short read. You can read it in one night, and,
No, sure.
and it's a lot of food for thought.
What is the story? What's it all about? What's it say,
Um,
the book?
Well, he says that Buddha, because there's a lot of confusion and argumentation, because it's a heated topic, and it's also heated by intense attachment and deep-seated habit.
So what is he pointing out the Buddha's saying being vegetarian?
He's trying to cut through all the arguments and discussion by saying that Buddha allowed originally some, you know, saying, okay, eat meat with a threefold purity, and this was his way of making sure he brought everyone into the fold who wouldn't come into the fold otherwise if meat was like just no. And then he says in the Mahayana path and the Bodhisattva path, absolutely no. And then the book just goes on and on and on, and it quotes all different sutras, all different teachings.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. Yeah, and so the bottom line is, as you're saying, is we have to think about it all. This is the whole point about karma, we have to think about it all. The more we can be clear about the cause and effect process.
Shabkar.
Sure, okay, good. Good, okay, thanks, that's good. So anybody else, questions? Yes, Rita.
I thought I remembered you saying at one point that if you have someone else kill for you, then it creates more negative.
That's what I said now, yeah, that's what I said here, yeah.
Okay, so wouldn't that apply to being a vegetarian if you have somebody else do the killing?
Okay, so you mean you had the intention, please go and kill this meat for me. So give a scenario, because every scenario is different. So give me a scenario which this would apply.
Well,
If you're not a vegetarian, which means you eat
am.
meat. Okay, so what's the question then? Sorry. What was the
Let me
question
just
again? I
give you-
missed the point.
Yeah, so I've been a vegetarian since I was 9, and it was since I realized that what it was that I was eating, you
Right,
know, and I
okay.
have never been able to figure out how people can eat meat and not think about
I understand.
what they're eating.
Sure. What they're eating meaning?
That they're eating a dead animal that's been murdered.
And what's wrong with a dead animal? It's the same as carrots when there's no mind there. I'm just going to debate with you on purpose, not to prove any point, but just to talk about it. Can I debate with you? Can I debate with you?
Absolutely.
Good, okay. So let's say there is a piece of meat there,
Mhm.
and it's kind of rotten, and there's a carrot next to it which is also rotten. What's the difference? There's no minds there. There's no mind there. I'm just talking now,
Yeah.
looking at things. So often what I find with vegetarians, you get a lot of, have aversion for meat. You have aversion for meat. That's a delusion. That's called anger. What do you have aversion for meat for? It's just flesh. It's the same. This is the 4 elements. The same as a carrot. The same as a mountain. Okay. No. I'm discussing what you just said. And you're like a lot of vegetarians. I'm going to be debating on purpose now. Forgive me. Your real reason is compassion. Okay. Well, you didn't say that. You said seeing what they're eating. It's just flesh. It's the mind has gone. It's nothing. It's caca. It's caca. The human heart, once the human heart is out of the body, is caca. But we get so shocked because it's a human heart, we think that's the evil crime. We have a lot of emotion around it. The point is, the real point is, you don't want to eat meat because you don't want to increase your attachment because you know a sentient being died for that meal. Well, that's different. But aversion to meat, which a lot of vegetarians have, and maybe you're one of them, I don't know. You didn't say it much yet. There's a strong aversion to eating meat. That's a delusion. Aversion is a delusion, it's anger. So that's one, I'd like to say that point. And that mightn't be you, sweetheart. So go on. You said you've been a vegetarian. Is it because you've got compassion for the creatures? Is it compassion, mostly?
Yes.
Okay, that's fantastic. But you didn't say it.
Okay.
Next,
But for me,
Jen said you don't understand how people can't think about it. Maybe they have thought
for me
about
it's worse not thinking about it than it would be to go out
it. Why
and
do you
hunt.
assume a person who eats meat doesn't think about it? Why do you assume that? What's your logic
Because they
there?
can do it, they can follow through with it.
What's wrong with eating a piece of dead meat? If you have thought about it, maybe you have compassion for the creature, maybe you blow a mantra onto it, maybe,
Because you have other choices.
but maybe, listen, that's not the point. Why would that be a negative action? What makes it negative? For the person who eats
What's your
meat, who
intention?
also thinks about it, who knows it was an animal, but then in their heart develops compassion, in their heart they say a mantra, let's say they do this. I'm just talking, I'm just debating with you, darling. I'm not proposing any position. So let's say you have a person who's a Buddhist, who's devoted, who never kills a living being, who doesn't lie, doesn't kill, doesn't steal, has bodhisattva vows. Let's say there's a person like that, and let's say they have meat sometimes in their dinner. But they think of it, they have compassion, they say a mantra, they blow on that flesh and they eat it. Where's the negative action in that? Pinpoint precisely which part is the negative action that they create.
Still condoned killing.
Oh, that's your extreme, over-exaggerated assumption there that it's condoning killing. That's not relevant. Not at all. Not at all. Why should you? Let's say this person never cooks for themselves. Let's say they go to a meal and a person offers them a lamb chop. So you're saying by eating a lamb chop you're condoning the killing of the lamb. I would not agree with that. That's in fact not true. It's just not true. It's just not true. That person could have enormous compassion for that lamb. Think about it, be grateful, and then say a mantra and blow on the meat, and that would benefit that lamb hugely. That's actually a virtuous action. I'm debating with you purposely. So where's the negative action in a person who thinks that way? Who has compassion, who never kills a living being, never harms another, never lies, doesn't even go out and ask anything for themselves. That's what a bodhisattva is. But if they were given a lamb chop, they would eat it. So where's the negative action?
Blessing the lamb chop, they're helping the lamb.
Of course they are, yes, that's my goodness, yes. And that lamb is creating enormous merit by feeding that bodhisattva. There's another way of saying it. So where's the negative action done by that person?
No, you just filled in a few
Good.
goals for
I
me
know,
about
darling.
this
Good.
theology. I'm not
Yes.
sure I'm quite there with
You don't need to be. It's really all right. I understand. You don't need to be. And none of this is to say we should eat meat or shouldn't eat meat. Everybody has to make their own decisions, And the whole point of attempting to be a Buddhist, or anybody, but this is the Buddhist view, is to be conscious, to be aware, to know what we're doing and know the consequences and know the causes and the results. And the key one with vegetarianism, of course, the main one is to have compassion for the sentient beings who harmed. Therefore not want to be part of that, mainly to lessen your own attachment. But you could argue a person who has no attachment to food, let's say a high bodhisattva who has no attachment to food, then for them to accept that lamb chop, there's no non-virtue, it's not possible. But another person, let's say, who's got masses of attachment to meat, for that person to eat meat, much heavier karma because of their own attachment. So there's a multitude of scenarios. Then you've got a person who is in the fish restaurant and you say, please kill that fish for me. That's heavy, heavy duty. Because you not only want the being to die yourself, but you get someone else to do it for you. But that's not the same as if you sit there and someone offers you a lamb chop and you don't want to upset your auntie and you'll eat it out of kindness to your auntie. That does not, there's no way the same. You are not condoning killing. You are not condoning. You ask nobody to kill that lamb. The lamb was killed in New Zealand 6 months ago, for God's sake. Karma is really specific. It's about what goes on in your mind from moment to moment to moment. It's not just determined by the external action. It's very, very much more refined and more nuanced and more precise. This is the understanding about karma. The best would be to not eat meat. But then the best is not eat anything, because every sentient beings, countless sentient beings have died. And many people who are real pure vegetarians, even in their vegetarian garden, bring in this creature to eat this creature so they can get good carrots. That's like Hitler. That's evil. That's really evil, because we don't value small sentient beings in our culture. The Peter people don't even consider, even now maybe there's something to defend fish a bit. But as long as it doesn't look like us, we don't give it any condition, we don't give it any credibility at all. Who cares about flies? Who cares about cockroaches? Even vegetarians. Do you ever kill any sentient beings? Now we're being personal. Do you ever know anybody who's a vegetarian who kills cockroaches and ants and roaches and rats?
Yeah, no, I had a problem with mice in my house.
And so you killed them?
I blocked up all the holes.
So still?
Yeah, I did.
There you go. See, that's the thing. That's the thing. You don't want to eat the flesh of a mice, but you're happy to kill a sentient being. That's a contradiction. That will, for the Buddhist view, not be personal with you. I don't care about your struggle. I do care about your struggle, but it's not the point. The Buddhist one would be if there's a living being there. So the difference between choice between a living mouse and a dead lamb. Eat the lamb any day, baby. That's nothing in comparison to killing a live mouse. Just debating with you, just giving you food for thought, looking at it from a few other perspectives. Do you understand?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you very much for opening up the topic. But don't fall into the trap of having aversion for meat.
What do you mean?
Not aversion meaning disliking it. Ooh, disgusting, that's meat. Get it out of my house. Oh, I can't stand meat. That's revolting. Oh, I can't stand the smell of meat. That's aversion. It's anger. It's another delusion. That's not compassion at all. I'm not saying you, but a lot of vegetarians get that way. Very purist and fundamentalist about it. I'm not suggesting you. That's your private business. But that's a very common thing among vegetarians. It's very interesting. And I'm not telling you if I'm a vegetarian or not. It's not the point. It's not the issue here. But the strongest thing among vegetarians, it's very fundamentalist. They're worse than the fundamentalist Muslims and Christians, you know. Ugh, and then they go, meat's disgusting. Ooh, get that smell out of my house. I can't stand it. It's disgusting. That's another delusion. That's another delusion, you know. That's not compassion at all. So this is where we easily can get fundamentalist with our views, and so it's why it's so important to dump them on other people. You know, each person is private, and even your view. And I'm sorry, you're the one who said it, so I'm using you as a wonderful example. I don't know how they can't see it. That's what a fundamentalist view would be. A person who's a fundamentalist Christian just can't imagine how everybody can't see that Jesus is a savior, and you're the same. You just said, I'm sorry to be rude to you, just being just a minute. Being provocative. You said, I just can't see how nobody else can see it. That's your narrow-mindedness.
Okay.
Do you understand my point? A little bit. Think about it. Because if you understood human beings' minds, you would understand. That means a more tolerant, spacious mind. It's okay. You're the one who started the topic. You're very brave. What's your name?
Gina.
Gina. Thank you, Gina. Well done.
I was just going to say that a few years ago I had so many mice in the house, it was unbelievable. So I was just sitting there watching, and they're going on the counter, down the cord, this way, on the counter, down the cord, this way, and I'm just watching. It was just like going over. Finally I was like, I've had it. And I put one of those little Victor traps down the bottom where the cord was, and then right away, one went down there. It was like, and I ran and got a butter knife.
So what's the bottom line here, please?
I ran and got a butter knife because his back leg was foot was in there, and I let him out, and then I was just like.
So what's the bottom? I'm confused about the story. What are you telling me? You killed them or you didn't kill them?
Well, just that I haven't set a trap since then.
So you mean you killed the mice? That was killing them?
No, I didn't kill him. I caught his foot, and then I ran and got a butter knife because I.
Darling, I'm trying to get the point of the story. Was this trap for killing them or saving them?
I thought the point was self-evident.
No, I didn't get it. I don't understand what the trap is. There are different kinds of traps. Some traps kill, some traps save.
Oh, well, the Victor trap usually goes and gets them right on the
I
head.
didn't know that, and then it kills them.
Oh, yeah, it's like one of those was like that. And
Well, you meant to tell, you were supposed to laugh at this terrible story, how you slaughtered a poor mouse?
Well, you could laugh at the fact that it was screaming like a baby and it ran and got a butter knife.
It's not
so I
funny,
could let it
it's not screaming like a baby, it was crying in agony because you hurt it. But you think it's a joke.
out. No, I don't.
Well, you laughed. So what's the point of this to now being really heavy now? Baiting again. At least I'm glad you're...
Just come over here and hit me.
No, I don't wish anyone should hit you. Why should I want to do that? That would be a terrible thing to
I don't
do.
know, so what is your question for me?
I didn't have a question. I was just unpacking your story to get to the point. No, luckily you didn't kill the mouse. I'm very relieved.
I thought it was a suitable story for what we're talking about.
I know that, darling. So the conclusion is you didn't kill the mouse.
No.
Oh, I'm very happy. Good.
No,
That's
I
a good.
haven't-
It's a
I
good
haven't
ending.
set a trap.
Well
I
done.
haven't set the trap.
That's the point of the story. Thank you. I got it.
Well, the other point of the story was is that
Yeah.
when it screamed, I was like, you know, oh no, and ran and got the butter knife.
There you
quickly.
go.
That's
Good.
the other
There
point.
you go.
is
Well done.
recognition of an animal
Of its
suffering,
suffering. Well done.
even though it looks like a mouse.
I understand. There you go. So that's now we got the point of the story.
Well,
Thank
so
you.
now when they come out of the stove, look at me, I'm just like, hey, what's happening?
Good. Any other points about before you go and eat vegetarian dinner? Yes, darling.
It's not about vegetarianism.
Okay,
It's
Mary.
it's about forgiveness. And I just want to go back to something you said earlier with regards to forgiveness not being part of the purification process, because there is no creator. I mean, number one, I found that incredibly powerful because that then again emphasizes putting the onus on us in terms of responsibility for everything we do. But my question to you is, or need of clarification.
Yes.
Does forgiveness, how does it factor in with regards to whom we interact with? Just from a technical standpoint,
What do you mean, Diane?
is forgiveness not utilized the term, but is it rather compassion? If someone says,
Well, if
does
it's-
something bad to us, and we
Well, obviously,
eventually...
if you have compassion for a person,
Right,
and you have the basis of your view of compassion, which is karma, which is they will suffer,
right.
then it's sort of absolutely inbuilt into that is natural forgiveness, isn't it?
Okay, that's what I...
Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just wanted to be correct in terms of the terminology and the technical, logical thinking of it through. Anyway, you answered my question.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. So just to summarise where we've been so far since yesterday on this 4 opponent powers. 4 steps. Regretting, which is acknowledging that I did this and that, which is negative. A negative is one that harms another. The reason we regret it is because Buddha's fundamental view of karma is that everything we think and do and say will bring results to me. So an action that's called negative, which harms another, is one motivated by a delusion, so that sows a seed in my mind that will ripen as my future suffering. So for this reason I regret having done it, because I don't want future suffering. Then I think, whom will I turn to as the doctor, whose medicine I want to take? This is reliance, and we discussed the Buddha. And the second part, which we've only just begun to discuss, is the one of compassion. This whole discussion came out, all these examples of, compassion, not eating animals' flesh because of compassion for the suffering of the animal, not drinking milk because of the suffering of the cows, saving the life of a mouse whom she initially was going to kill because she saw the suffering, so had compassion, stopped her from killing. Compassion. But we looked at compassion from the subtler view, the subtler perspective based on karma, the Buddha's view that everybody is harming because they've been harmed, and then harming will cause them to be more harm. And all of us with this view of karma, first the basis of our own regret, and now the basis of compassion. So in this compassion step, we would then think of those we have harmed, intentionally harmed, even those we haven't intentionally harmed, even all the creatures who died for the vegetables we're eating. Our actions of eating carrots is resulted in the harm of countless sentient beings. This is a fact. So even to think of, this is very powerful, to be conscious, talking about here, to Gina, being aware and conscious of what we're doing, but realizing we might not eat meat. Fine, but what about all the other creatures? We're still going to eat the carrots. Creatures died for those carrots, in the gardening, in the planting. Died terrible deaths. So then even in this one we can have compassion. We didn't directly kill them, but they killed as a result of our eating food, So we can have compassion, wishing to only benefit others, wishing to purify for the sake of all sentient beings. Then we can have compassion for those who've harmed us, because they will suffer because of this. Compassion. Can bring in all of this. And this again is this awareness of interdependence, as you said. We're all on this earth together. So there's kind of much more, again, nuanced, more subtle understandings of this one of interdependence and suffering and creatures and eating and attachment and hurting others and all this, you know. It's very important to think about. So we'll stop there, we'll have lunch, and we'll finish the last 2 steps after lunch. So let's now, though, just think of lunch differently as opposed to attachment. So let's think of it as, let's think of it in terms of not attachment, let's think of it in terms of compassion. So with this in mind, let's think it isn't meat that we're going to be eating. There could be some cheese there, which has come from milk, which has come from suffering cows, you know, suffered all their lives. All the other creatures who died, the ones who might, you know, the cow didn't die, but it suffered, you know, it was misused, suffered for its milk. All the creatures who died, the insects, countless numbers of them, countless. And the growing of all the vegetables, in the planting of them, in the digging out of them, the harvesting, the driving them to the markets, the cutting of them. I mean, the Buddha would say this: wherever there's existence, there are sentient beings, trillions of tiny ones. So everywhere we go, we can't help but harm sentient beings. So thinking, no choice, we're going to at least eat, you know, reasonably, compassionately. But we're going to think, I must eat this food so I can be healthy. So I can continue on my spiritual path and not harm others as much as I possibly can. Not kill, for sure not kill. And see a living being, do not want to kill it. Find a multitude of other ways to deal with it. And then not to do actions that will cause suffering to sentient beings. But we're so limited in this because it's existing we cause suffering. So doing the best we can to not harm sentient beings. This is the basis, the fundamental basis for the sake of sentient beings. And that is what produces me, grows me, you know, into the person I can become. And then we become more qualified as we progress to be able to actually benefit others. First we try not to harm, and then we actually benefit. So we think of all this food, oceans of it, this delicious food, this nectar, which we bless with Om Ahum, Om Ahum, Om Ahum. And then we imagine too, also here, we imagine if we could, we would offer it to all the suffering sentient beings in the universe, all the holy beings and all the suffering sentient beings, all the creatures, taking away all their suffering, giving them everything they need. Lama Sangye Lama Che, Rejin Lama Gelun Te, Kong Gije Bo Lama Te, Lama Namla Che Pabu. Okay, so enjoy lunch. And if you feel like it, discuss. We've got an hour, hour and a quarter, hour and a half, see how we go, like yesterday. So it's really helpful to make the lunchtime part of the retreat, you know, sort of seamlessly discussing any of this stuff. So really, this topic is always so powerful, always so controversial, so interesting, you know, this one of vegetarianism. So bring it up, think about it, analyse different things. Remember the bottom line, remember that it's all in reference to the whole idea of karma, and karma for the Buddha is where we use it in a very colloquial way, but the real way to think of it is the actions of the mind. It's what your mind does. Moment by moment. Buddha says every microsecond that your mind functions, it's doing something, programming itself, sowing seeds in your mind, and then all the thoughts in our mind and the emotions, our body and speech carry out those actions, don't they? They sort of do the wishes of our mind. This whole process is what Buddha means by the law of cause and effect. That what goes on in our mind and then by our body and speech, this is the main source of our own experiences in the future. We are the boss. We are the ones who create it. So keeping this as the basis in discussing the consequences of all this, you know, that's the idea. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you.
They're set up 5 more minutes before they're quite ready.
Oh, okay, well then we're
Just
going out.
5.
All right then. See you soon.
For years, I've had it for years.
Thanks a lot for starting.
And they